The world outside your window begins to fade, dissolving into a soft charcoal haze as the weight of the modern day lifts from your shoulders. Imagine, if you will, a threshold made not of wood or stone, but of pure, cool mist. As you step through, the frantic ticking of the clock slows, its rhythm replaced by the deep, rhythmic pulse of the earth itself. You are safe here. You are anchored in a space where time holds no authority, a sanctuary of shadows and soft light. We are traveling back, shedding the layers of the present like autumn leaves, descending through the centuries until the air grows crisp with the scent of pine needles and ancient stone. Ahead, a faint ethereal glow begins to permeate the darkness, the color of a deep midnight ocean. It is the blue of kings, the blue of the heavens, the blue of the Florentine dawn in the year 1540. Here, in the quietude of this historical daydream, your breath finds its natural, easy cadence. The journey is long, the path is paved with velvet silence, and the only requirement is your surrender to the stillness. You are entering the mill of the masters, a place of alchemy and peace, where the stone is turned to dust and the dust is turned to dreams. Close your eyes now. The Renaissance is waiting to cradle your spirit in its everlasting sapphire embrace. As we settle into this sanctuary of sound and memory, you may feel a desire to return to this quiet place whenever the world becomes too loud. If this journey into the blue shadows of Florence brings peace to your heart, consider becoming a permanent resident of our growing community of dreamers. By subscribing to this vessel of history, you ensure that these portals to the past remain open for you night after night. Your presence here is a quiet tether that allows us to continue weaving these tapestries of sleep and education, keeping the flickering candle of ancient wisdom burning bright. Should you find a moment of stillness, perhaps a gentle tap on the like button or a whispered comment below will act as your own signature in our ledger of shared peace. These small gestures help our sanctuary reach other weary souls searching for the same respite you find now. But for this moment, let those thoughts drift away like wood smoke over the Arno. There is nothing more for you to do, nothing to achieve, and nowhere else you need to be. You are part of a timeless tradition of seekers, and as we move deeper into the mill, your support is the silent wind that carries us forward into the heart of the Lapis Lazuli dawn. Stay a while, rest your weary mind, and let the blue light guide you home. The transition from the ethereal mist into the physical reality of 16th century Florence is not a sudden jolt, but a slow, syrupy immersion into a world crafted from stone, river water, and the patient passage of time. We find ourselves standing on the periphery of the city, where the urban sprawl of the Medici's grand capital begins to dissolve into the lush, rolling embrace of the Tuscan countryside. Here, the air carries a different weight. It is thick with the scent of damp earth, the sharp, refreshing tang of river reeds, and the faint, resinous perfume of distant cypress trees standing like dark sentinels against the horizon. The sky above is not yet blue, but a delicate, bruised lavender, the colour of a fading violet pressed between the pages of a heavy book. In this pre-dawn suspension, the world is held in a state of grace, a moment of absolute equilibrium before the first golden finger of the sun touches the terracotta tiles of the distant Duomo. We approach the mill, a structure that seems to have grown out of the riverbank itself rather than having been built upon it. This is the workshop of the lapis lazuli grinders, a place where the most precious pigment in the known world is coaxed from the heart of stubborn rock. The building is a low, sprawling masterpiece of functional Renaissance architecture, constructed from the pale, honey-coloured Pietra Forte stone that characterizes the soul of Florence. In this dim, early light, the stone appears silvered, cooled by the overnight dew that clings to every crevice and masonry joint. You can reach out in your mind and feel the texture of these walls. They are rough and pitted, worn smooth in places by decades of passing shoulders, and the persistent dampness of the Arno's breath. Each block of stone is a silent witness to the history of the craftsmen who have crossed this threshold, their hands stained with the blue of the heavens. To your left, the great waterwheel, the beating heart of the mill, moans softly in its steady, rhythmic dance with the river. It is a massive construction of seasoned oak, darkened to the colour of midnight by constant immersion in the water. The wood is slick, adorned with long, flowing tresses of emerald green moss that sway gently in the current, looking like the hair of a sleeping river nymph. Listen to the sound it makes. It is a deep, resonant thud, followed by the crystalline splashing of water falling from the wooden paddles back into the stream. Thump, splash, trickle. Thump, splash, trickle. It is a hypnotic meter, a metronome for the soul that aligns your heartbeat with the natural flow of the valley. The water of the Arno, heavy with the silt of the mountains, curls around the wheel in silver ribbons, whispering secrets of the high Apennines to the mossy wood. The architecture of the mill is designed to harness this movement, and as we look upward we see the heavy timber beams that extend from the wheelhouse into the main structure. These are not merely supports, they are the skeletal system of the workshop. Huge rafters of chestnut wood, hewn by hand and polished by the oil of machinery, stretch across the ceiling of the outer porch. You can see the marks of the adze on the wood, the tiny ridges and valleys left by a carpenter's blade 40 years ago, now softened by a fine patina of dust. In the corners of these beams, spiders have spun intricate silvery webs that catch the microscopic droplets of mist, turning them into shimmering necklaces of liquid light. There is no wind here to disturb them. The air is as still as a held breath, stagnant in the most peaceful way imaginable. The entrance to the mill is a grand arched doorway, its lintel carved with a modest fleur-de-lis, the giglio of Florence, now partially obscured by a climbing ivy that has turned a deep, sombre burgundy in the cool morning air. The door itself is made of thick planks of walnut reinforced with hand-forged iron studs that have rusted into a beautiful earthy orange. These studs are shaped like small pyramids, and if you were to run your thumb over them, you would feel the cold metallic grit of the iron against your skin. There is a heavy iron ring for a knocker, but today the door stands slightly ajar, as if the building itself is exhaling, inviting you to step out of the morning chill and into the sheltered warmth of its interior. As we linger on the threshold, let us observe the way the light begins to change. The lavender of the sky is being bled out by a pale creamy yellow creeping up from the east. This light does not yet illuminate the world, it merely defines the silhouettes of the objects around us. The rows of olive trees on the hillside across the river look like silver puffs of smoke, their leaves upturned to catch the moisture. The path leading to the mill is made of crushed river stone and grey pebbles, each one smoothed by the footsteps of generations. Look closely at the ground. The pebbles are arranged in a natural mosaic, some flecked with mica that glints like fallen stars in the growing dawn. The moisture on the ground makes the stones appear polished like jewels scattered by a careless hand. The air is getting colder just before the sun breaks, a phenomenon that makes the warmth radiating from the stone walls feel even more inviting. You can smell the wood smoke now, a thin blue ribbon of scent drifting from a small chimney at the rear of the mill, where a brazier has been kept lit through the night to keep the dampness away from the delicate powders. It is a comforting smell, reminiscent of hearths and homes, of baked bread and the safety of a flickering fire. It mingles with the scent of the river and the metallic, ozone-like smell of wet stone, creating a sensory tapestry that is uniquely Florentine, uniquely 1540. Step forward now. Over the threshold your boots make no sound on the heavy stone floor, which is covered in a thin, almost invisible layer of fine stone dust, the ghost of the blue. This dust is everywhere, a silent byproduct of the mill's labour. It softens the edges of the room, coating the workbenches and the heavy ceramic jars in a velvet film. In the dim light, this dust has a luminous quality, as if the floor were reflecting the very sky we just left behind. The interior of the mill is a forest of shadow and timber. Huge vertical shafts of oak rise from the floor to the ceiling, connected to the waterwheel outside by a complex system of wooden gears and leather belts. These gears are currently disengaged, resting in the quiet hours before the master arrives, yet they seem to vibrate with potential energy, waiting for the lever to be thrown and the dance of the stones to begin. The walls inside are thick, nearly 3 feet of solid masonry, which creates a profound sense of insulation. The sounds of the outside world, the waking birds, the rushing river, the rustle of the wind are filtered through these stones until they are nothing more than a soft rhythmic hum. It is like being inside a great hollowed-out mountain. The ceiling is high, lost in the shadows, where the smell of old wood and linseed oil lingers. Here and there, narrow windows, more like arrow slits, pierce the stone, allowing thin, concentrated needles of morning light to stab through the darkness. In these beams, millions of dust motes perform a slow, chaotic ballet, rising and falling on the invisible currents of air stirred by your presence. Each mote is a tiny fragment of history, a bit of stone or wood or fibre, suspended in the golden amber of the moment. We see the first of the grinding stations, massive circular troughs carved from solid granite, within which sit the heavy runners, the stones that do the work of crushing the Afghan lapis into pigment. These troughs are empty now, their grey surfaces scrubbed clean, but the deep grooves in the granite tell the story of 1,000 grinds. You can imagine the sound they make when in motion, a low tectonic growl that vibrates through the very soles of your feet. But for now they are silent, cold and majestic in their stillness. Around them are the tools of the trade, long wooden paddles, iron scrapers and delicate brushes made of badger hair, all laid out with the precision of a surgeon's instruments. There is a deep, profound sense of order here, a respect for the material and the process that transcends the mere manufacturing of paint. This is a cathedral of colour, and you are its only witness in the blue hour of the Florentine dawn. As we move deeper into the heart of the mill, the architecture reveals itself not just as a shelter, but as a living, breathing machine of wood and gravity. The transition from the arched entryway to the main grinding floor is marked by a shift in the air's temperature, a cool, steady coolness that feels like a damp cloth pressed against the forehead. The ceiling here ascends into a vaulted darkness, supported by massive hand-hewn pillars of Tuscan oak. These pillars are colossal, their girth so wide that 2 men could not join hands around them. The bark was stripped away decades ago, leaving behind a surface that has been polished by the oily residue of the mill, and the constant friction of floating stone dust. If you were to press your palm against the grain, you would feel the history of the tree, the ridges of its growth rings, the knots where branches once sought the sun, and the deep vertical fissures where the wood has seasoned and tightened over the years. Above us, the complex anatomy of the ceiling is a marvel of 16th century engineering. It is a dense thicket of joists, rafters and crossbeams, all interlocking in a geometry of strength. The wood is a deep, scorched umber, darkened by the smoke of the braziers and the natural aging of the tannin. In the spaces between the beams, the shadows are thick and textured, like layers of black gauze stacked one upon the other. It is in these shadows that the silence of the mill truly resides. It is a heavy silence, one that carries the weight of the massive granite stones resting below. The architecture does not just hold up the roof, it holds the stillness of the morning, protecting it from the encroaching light of the outside world. Running the length of the hall is the main drive shaft, a gargantuan trunk of timber that connects the external waterwheel to the internal machinery. It lies horizontally, cradled in massive bronze bearings that are slick with a mixture of animal fat and olive oil. This lubricant has a scent all its own, a heavy, rich and slightly metallic aroma that anchors the senses to the reality of the workshop. The shaft is perfectly straight, yet it possesses a natural ripple in its texture, a reminder that it was once a living entity in a forest nearby. In the dim light, the sheen of the oil on the wood makes it look like the skin of a great slumbering serpent, resting in the bowels of the stone building. To the right, the wall is lined with a series of smaller alcoves, each one a miniature chamber of industry. These alcoves are built from the same pale pietra forte as the exterior, but here the stone has been stained by the materials of the trade. Near the floor, the masonry has taken on a permanent indigo tint, where centuries of lapis lazuli dust have settled into the porous surface of the rock. It is as if the building itself is slowly turning into the pigment it produces. Within these alcoves sit the sieving frames, delicate structures of pine wood over which fine silk is stretched. The silk is so thin it is almost translucent, shimmering like a dragonfly's wing in the stray beams of light. You can imagine the touch of it as soft as a whisper, yet strong enough to separate the coarse grit from the celestial powder that will eventually grace the ceilings of the Vatican. The floor beneath your feet is a masterclass in Florentine masonry. It is composed of large, irregular flags of slate, fitted together with such precision that the seams are almost invisible. The slate is a dark, moody grey, but where the light from the narrow windows hits it, it reveals flashes of silver and blue. The surface is not perfectly level. It dips and rises slightly, worn down by the rhythmic pacing of the millers. In the low spots, the fine blue dust has collected in drifts, looking like miniature mountain ranges of sapphire sand. As you walk, or rather as you drift through the space, there is a tactile sense of permanence. This floor was not meant for a lifetime, but for centuries. It is cold, reaching through the leather of an imagined sandal to ground you in the literal foundation of the city. In the centre of the room stands the primary grinding trough, a circular basin carved from a single block of volcanic basalt. The basalt is dark, nearly black, and its surface is matte, absorbing what little light enters the room. Inside the basin sits the runner stone, a thick disk of white marble from the quarries of Carrara. The contrast between the black basalt and the white marble is striking, a visual representation of the alchemy taking place here, where dark, raw earth is refined into something pure and light. The marble runner is currently at rest, its bottom edge buried in a shallow layer of unground lapis lazuli stones. These raw stones are beautiful in their own right, unpolished, jagged, and flecked with golden pyrite that glitters like fool's gold against the deep blue of the silicate. Beside the trough is a heavy wooden workbench, its surface scarred by the marks of 1,000 chisels and hammers. The wood of the bench is maple, lighter than the oak of the pillars, and it has been rubbed to a dull glow by the constant movement of hands and tools. Resting on the bench is a collection of leather pouches, their hides supple and darkened by use. Some are tied with twine, their bellies bulging with raw ultramarine stones brought by caravan from the distant mountains of Badakhshan. Others lie empty, draped over the edge of the table like discarded skins. The smell of the leather is prominent here, earthy, musky, and comforting, cutting through the mineral scent of the stone. Looking toward the back of the mill, we see a staircase that winds upward into the drying lofts. The stairs are narrow and steep, carved directly into the thickness of the stone wall. Each step is a solid block of travertine, its surface pitted with the tiny, natural craters of the stone. The handrail is a simple rope of twisted hemp, anchored to the wall by iron rings. The rope is rough to the touch, its fibres prickly and stiff with the salt of the air and the dust of the mill. As the eye follows the staircase upward, it disappears into a world of even deeper shadows, where the air is warmer and the smell of drying pigment, a clean, chalky scent, begins to dominate. In this space, every architectural choice was made with a purpose. The high ceilings allow the heat of the summer to rise, keeping the grinding floor cool and stable for the pigments. The thick walls provide the thermal mass necessary to prevent the delicate lapis from becoming too brittle or too damp. Even the orientation of the narrow windows was calculated to catch the light at specific times of day, providing the master with the best possible illumination for judging the purity of the blue. It is a space of profound intentionality. The silence here is not empty, it is a full silence. It is filled with the phantom echoes of the day's work, the scrape of the shovel, the low rumble of the stones, the melodic calling of the apprentices. But in this moment at 1540 on a Florentine morning, those sounds are tucked away in the future. You are alone with the architecture. You can feel the vastness of the room pressing gently against you, a cocoon of stone and timber that separates you from the chaos of the world outside. The mill is a vessel, and you are the liquid within it, settling into the cracks and crevices of the history that surrounds you. As the light outside continues its slow golden climb, a single beam finally finds its way through one of the high slits in the masonry. It cuts through the dark like a blade, striking the side of the white marble runner stone. For a moment, the marble seems to glow from within, a bright incandescent spark in the gloom. The beam of light is filled with those dancing dust motes swirling in a slow hypnotic vortex. You watch them, mesmerized by their aimless, peaceful flight. There is no hurry here. The stone has waited millions of years to be turned into blue. It can wait another hour for the miller to arrive. The architecture remains steadfast, a silent guardian of the process, a temple built to honor the transformation of the earth into the art of the heavens. You breathe in the cool mineral air, and with every exhale you sink deeper into the ancient wooden heart of the mill. As we leave the vast echoing space of the main grinding floor, we begin a slow, deliberate ascent up the narrow stone staircase that curls into the upper reaches of the mill. Each step upward is a gentle detachment from the heavy earthen weight of the basalt and granite below. These stairs, carved from porous, pale travertine, have been worn into soft, swooping crescents in their centres by the countless quiet footfalls of the craftsman. If you were to trace your hand along the edge of the stone tread, you would feel a smoothness akin to sea glass, a texture polished by time and patience rather than by force. The thick hemp rope serving as a handrail offers a comforting resistance. It is rough, woven from hundreds of individual coarse fibres that have been tightly braided together and secured by heavy wrought iron rings driven deep into the masonry. The rope smells faintly of salt, dried grass, and the inescapable chalky dust of the stones below, creating a tactile and olfactory map of the building's history beneath your fingertips. With each ascending step, the microclimate of the mill undergoes a subtle, soothing transformation. The damp, mineral-heavy chill of the ground floor begins to soften, replaced by an atmosphere that is noticeably warmer and far drier. It feels like stepping from a cool, shaded forest ravine into a sunlit, sheltered clearing. The acoustics of the space change as well. The low, resonant hum of the river outside and the heavy silence of the massive wooden gears are gently muffled, wrapped in an invisible layer of insulation. Up here, the silence is softer, lighter, and more intimate. It does not press against you with the weight of architecture. Rather, it settles around your shoulders like a warm, familiar cloak, inviting your mind to drift further into this peaceful 16th century sanctuary. Reaching the top of the stairwell, we step onto the floor of the drying loft. Unlike the unyielding slate of the lower level, the floor here is constructed from incredibly wide planks of seasoned poplar wood. The planks are a pale, milky blonde fitted together with wooden pegs rather than iron nails, allowing the floor to breathe and flex imperceptibly beneath your feet. There is a faint, comforting creak as we move across the room, a low wooden sigh that speaks of the building's natural organic life. The grain of the poplar is beautiful, swirling in delicate, hypnotic patterns that look like topographical maps of forgotten, tranquil islands. Time and the soft scuffing of leather shoes have burnished the wood to a satin finish, and the fine layer of blue dust that exists everywhere in this mill is much lighter here, clinging only to the deepest grooves of the grain like a fine sapphire mist. This loft is the heart of the purification process, the delicate stage where the crushed stone is finally coaxed into surrendering its celestial pigment. The architecture of this room is dominated by rows of intricate wooden drying racks that stretch from the floor almost to the low sloped ceiling. These racks are constructed from thin, flexible slats of ashwood, forming a lattice of elegant geometric perfection. Draped across these wooden frames are lengths of unbleached linen, hanging in soft cascading folds. The fabric is rough-hewn, spun by hand in the farmhouses of the Tuscan countryside, and it retains the natural oatmeal hue of the flax from which it was woven. Let us look closely at the linen. The weave is a magnificent microscopic landscape of intersecting threads, some thick and nubby, others thin and taut. Where the morning light catches the fabric, you can see tiny, loose fibers standing on end, creating a soft, glowing halo around the cloth. This linen is the final resting place for the purified lapis lazuli before it is collected, and even now you can see faint azure stains blooming across the fabric like watercolors dropped onto damp paper. The scent in this part of the loft is intensely comforting. It is the smell of clean, dry cloth mingled with a subtle, powdery earthiness, reminiscent of a quiet, sun-baked room where old books and folded garments are kept in peaceful seclusion. Moving past the labyrinth of linen, we discover a heavy oak work table tucked into an alcove beneath a steeply pitched section of the roof. This is the alchemist's nook, the the place where the true magic of the extraction occurs, utilizing a method known only to the finest masters of the era. To separate the brilliant blue lazurite from the dull grey calcite and pyrite within the raw stone, the powdered rock must be kneaded into a specialized dough. The ingredients for this dough are laid out upon the table with meticulous care, presenting a sensory feast of color and texture. Dominating the table are several large cakes of pure beeswax. The wax is a rich golden yellow, the exact color of late afternoon sunlight captured in a solid form. Its surface is slightly tacky to the touch, and it yields just a fraction of an inch under the gentle pressure of a thumb. Faint hexagonal patterns, the ghostly echoes of the honeycomb from which it was melted, can still be seen etched into the flat tops of the cakes. The fragrance radiating from the wax is intoxicatingly sweet, a heavy floral aroma of wildflowers, clover, and summer meadows that transports the mind far beyond the stone walls of the mill. Beside the beeswax sits a shallow wooden bowl filled with chunks of pine rosin. The rosin is translucent, glowing with a deep, fiery amber hue that seems to trap the light within its jagged edges. Each piece is unique, fractured into irregular shapes that resemble chunks of frozen golden syrup. When two pieces of the rosin are rubbed together, they produce a soft, resonant click and release a sharp, incredibly fresh scent of pine needles and deep, ancient forests. This crisp, resinous aroma perfectly balances the heavy sweetness of the beeswax, creating a beautifully complex bouquet that fills the alcove with an atmosphere of quiet, focused preparation. Completing the trio of ingredients is a small leather pouch filled with tiers of gum mastic, harvested from the bark of trees on the distant island of Chios. These tiers are small, round, and slightly cloudy, looking like drops of frosted glass or pale frozen dew. They are brittle and delicate, waiting to be crushed into a fine powder that will bind the wax and resin together. The tools required for this delicate work rest nearby, a small, polished marble mortar and a heavy brass pestle, both completely silent now, awaiting the rhythmic, hypnotic grinding that will blend these earthly materials into the sticky matrix designed to capture the blue. To the side of the table, resting on a small, unlit iron brazier, sits a beautifully hammered copper cauldron. It is in this vessel that the wax and resins will be slowly melted together. The copper is old and has developed a magnificent varied patina over the years. The base of the cauldron is blackened by the soot of countless gentle fires, a soft, velvety charcoal that speaks of slow, carefully tended heat. Moving up the curved sides, the black gives way to the deep, warm orange of polished copper, which is further decorated with spontaneous blooms of verdigris, a powdery seafoam green oxidation that forms wherever moisture has lingered. The cauldron has a heavy curved handle wrapped in strips of softened leather to protect the master's hands from the heat. Next to the cauldron is a delicate balancing scale, a masterpiece of brass and silver. The central pillar is a slender, fluted column of brass, supporting a horizontal beam from which two silver pans are suspended by whisper-thin chains. The metal is cool and smooth, reflecting the ambient light in distorted miniature landscapes. A set of nesting brass weights sits in a velvet-lined wooden box beside the scale. The weights are perfectly cylindrical, stepping down in size from a heavy block to a piece no larger than a grain of wheat. The tiny numbers stamped into their gleaming surfaces are barely visible, a testament to the precision and care required to measure out the exact proportions of the binding dough. Finally, we turn our gaze toward the small window set high into the wall of the loft. The glass is thick, leaded, and slightly warped, a common imperfection of the era that only adds to its charm. Because of the distortion in the glass, the view of the River Arno below is transformed into a moving, impressionistic painting. The water flows in languid, swirling strokes of silver and slate, its surface softened by the persistent morning mist. Through this warped lens, the world outside seems distant, dreamlike, and entirely removed from the reality of the mill. You stand in the quiet warmth of the loft, surrounded by the scents of wax and pine, the soft texture of the linen, and the patient slumber of the tools. The morning continues to stretch its golden fingers across the Florentine sky, but in here time remains beautifully, endlessly still, allowing you to simply exist in the gentle blue embrace of history. Leaving the warm, resinous embrace of the drying loft, we navigate a narrow, gently sloping passageway that curves deeper into the stone anatomy of the mill. This corridor acts as an architectural airlock, a transitional space where the dry, floral heat of the melted beeswax is gradually replaced by an atmosphere of profound, refreshing coolness. The air here feels incredibly pure, scrubbed clean of the floating stone dust that characterized the lower floors. It carries a distinct mineral crispness, redolent of deep hidden springs and the clean alkaline scent of wet clay. With every breath you take, this cool air acts as a soothing balm, settling deep into your lungs and unwinding the tight, invisible coils of tension that you may have carried in from the waking world. The environment commands a slow, deliberate pace. There is an overwhelming sense of reverence baked into the very stones of this hallway, guiding you toward the most delicate stage of the lapis lazuli's transformation. The floor underfoot shifts from the slightly yielding, resonant poplar planks of the loft to a smooth, continuous expanse of unglazed terracotta tiles. These tiles, fired centuries ago in the immense kilns of the Tuscan countryside, possess a beautiful muted warmth in their colouring, a spectrum of faded brick, dusty rose and pale, sun-baked earth. Because this specific corridor and the chamber beyond are dedicated to the washing of the pigment, the tiles are perpetually damp, gleaming with a soft, matte sheen in the low light. The moisture has smoothed their surfaces to the texture of a worn river stone, and they are astonishingly cool to the touch. If you were walking barefoot, the gentle, icy kiss of the damp terracotta against the soles of your feet would send a shiver of pure, relaxing comfort up your spine, anchoring you entirely to the quiet reality of the present moment. As the corridor opens out, we step into the settling room, a low-vaulted sanctum bathed in a dim, aqueous light. Arranged with mathematical precision across the center of this space are the settling vats, 6 massive majestic basins of ceramic perfection. These vats are not the rough, porous terracotta of the floor, but magnificent examples of Renaissance majolica coated in an impenetrable glossy glaze. They are enormous, each one wide enough for a person to comfortably encircle with their arms, and they rest upon squat, heavy pedestals of carved limestone. The sheer physical presence of these vessels is grounding. They are heavy, immovable anchors in a room dedicated entirely to the slow, patient surrender of gravity. Let us examine the interior of the nearest vat. The majolica glaze is a stark, brilliant, milky white, reminiscent of the purest alpine snow or a pool of fresh, rich cream. This immaculate white canvas was chosen with deliberate, absolute intention. It is the only background capable of revealing the true, unadulterated depth of the blue pigment as it settles. When you look closely at the surface of the empty upper rim, you can observe the fascinating phenomenon of craquelure, a microscopic network of hairline fractures resting just beneath the smooth, glassy exterior of the glaze. These tiny spiderweb fissures are a testament to the ceramic's age, expanding and contracting over decades of changing seasons. They form delicate, chaotic maps across the white surface, looking like the veins of a ghost leaf or the intricate delta of a forgotten river viewed from an immense height. The lifeblood of this specific chamber is water, but not the muddy, rushing current of the Arno that turns the great wheel outside. The water here is pristine, drawn from a deep, subterranean artesian well located in the hills far above the city, and channeled down to the mill through a dedicated enclosed lead and terracotta pipe. It emerges from the stone wall through a small, elegantly formed spout of polished copper, worn smooth and bright green with verdigris around its edges. This water is incredibly cold, carrying the chill of the deep earth, and it is entirely free of the silt and impurities that would ruin the final celestial pigment. Currently, the copper spout is not flowing in a steady stream, but rather weeping in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. A single heavy droplet gathers at the lip of the copper, swelling patiently, catching the faint ambient light like a liquid diamond before finally surrendering to gravity. It falls, suspended in the cool air for a fraction of a second, before striking the surface of the water already resting in the vat below. Plink. The sound is incredibly sharp, clear and musical, a single, resonant note echoing off the vaulted stone ceiling. Perfect concentric ring of ripples expands outward from the point of impact, traveling smoothly to the white glazed edges of the bowl before bouncing back in a complex overlapping geometry of tiny waves. You stand beside the vat and listen to this natural metronome. Plink, ripple, plink, ripple. The interval between each drop is perfectly spaced, perhaps 3 full heartbeats apart. It is a sound that demands nothing of you, a gentle auditory lullaby that sweeps away extraneous thoughts, leaving only the mesmerizing repetitive rhythm of water meeting water. The sound creates a bubble of profound isolation. The bustling city of Florence, the distant ringing of church bells, the political maneuverings of the Medici, all of it ceases to exist, drowned out by the gentle, persistent dripping of the spring water into the ceramic basin. Resting across the broad, curved rim of the neighboring vat are the kneading sticks, the simple, humble tools used to massage the blue from the dough. These sticks are carved from ancient olive wood, a timber revered for its incredible density and resistance to water. The wood is a deep, swirling mixture of golden brown and dark chocolate-colored grain, polished to a mirror shine by the natural oils of the craftsman's hands and the constant friction of the process. The ends of the sticks are perfectly rounded, resembling the smooth, blunt handle of a pestle. If you were to pick one up, you would be surprised by its significant heft. It feels substantial, a solid, comforting weight in the palm of your hand, smelling faintly of the peppery, bitter aroma of raw olive pits and the sweet, waxy residue of the pigment dough. It is within these white vats that the true alchemy occurs. When the master is at work, the thick, sticky dough of beeswax, pine rosin, and crushed lapis lazuli is submerged into the cold water. Using the heavy olive wood sticks, the dough is gently, rhythmically kneaded against the smooth bottom of the basin, the wax and resin clinging fiercely to the impurities. The grey calcite and the golden pyrite refuse to dissolve, but the pure celestial particles of lazurite, the true source of the colour, are released. They bleed from the dough into the clear spring water, blooming like heavy liquid smoke. If you lean over the rim and gaze into a vat where the water has been left to rest, you witness a breathtaking landscape of suspended colour. The water is no longer transparent. It has become a thick, opaque cosmos of blue. Because the particles of lazurite vary in size, gravity acts upon them at different speeds, creating a stunning vertical gradient of colour over the course of many long, silent days. Near the surface, the water is a pale, milky azure, carrying only the finest, most microscopic dust. This is the ash, the lowest grade of the pigment, yet still more beautiful than the skies of a summer morning. As your eyes travel deeper into the bowl, the colour intensifies, plunging into a rich, saturated cerulean, and finally resting at the very bottom against the white majolica glaze is the treasure. This is the first extraction, the heaviest and purest particles of the stone. It is a blue so deep, so profound, and so incredibly vibrant that it almost defies the limitations of human sight. It is ultramarine, the colour from beyond the sea. In the soft, dappled light of the settling room, this submerged layer of pigment seems to emit its own internal luminescence, a quiet, steady glow that commands absolute awe. You stare into the depths of the vat, losing yourself in the infinite, silent ocean of blue, while the slow, steady plink of the water droplet continues its endless rhythmic song, lulling your mind deeper into a state of perfect, unshakable peace. Stepping away from the hypnotic, aquatic metronome of the settling vats, we continue our gentle exploration, guided by a low, narrow archway that seems to burrow directly into the oldest, most solid foundations of the mill. As we leave the damp, echoing acoustics of the washing chamber behind, the moisture in the air begins to recede, replaced by an atmosphere of profound, preserving dryness. The terracotta tiles beneath our feet gradually yield to a floor made of large, irregular blocks of dark grey slate. These stones are incredibly thick and unyielding, absorbing the faint ambient light rather than reflecting it. They are completely silent underfoot, possessing a heavy grounding density that makes you feel profoundly anchored to the earth. We are approaching the inner sanctum of the workshop, the treasury where the final precious fruits of the master's labour are kept in quiet, undisturbed slumber. At the end of this short, dim corridor stands a door unlike any other in the building. It is not designed to welcome, but to protect. It is a massive portal constructed from thick vertical planks of centuries-old mahogany, a wood so dark it appears almost black in the shadows. The timber is bound together by heavy horizontal bands of wrought iron, spaced evenly from top to bottom. These iron straps are thick and brutalist in their construction, studded with large, dome-headed rivets that have oxidized into a beautiful, mottled texture of deep rust and charcoal grey. If you were to press your palm against the door, the wood would feel incredibly dense and cold, radiating a sense of absolute immovability. There is no handle, only a large, intricate iron keyhole set beneath a heavy, swinging escutcheon plate. Imagine reaching out and lifting that small iron plate. It moves with a soft metallic scrape, revealing the dark void of the lock mechanism within. In the master's hand, the key to this room is a heavy, beautifully forged instrument of iron, its teeth filed with absolute precision. When inserted and turned, the sound it produces is deeply satisfying, a slow, well-oiled internal clunk of tumbling metal that resonates through the thick wood. It is a sound of safety, of securing treasures that rival the value of gold. As the heavy door swings outward on its massive iron hinges, it does not creak, it simply displaces the air with a low, swooshing sigh, inviting us into a space wrapped in perfect, untouched darkness. As we cross the threshold, the air of the vault envelops us. It is noticeably cooler here, a subterranean chill that preserves and protects. The scent is entirely different from the rest of the mill. Gone is the damp, mineral aroma of the river, the sweet floral note of the beeswax, and the dusty chalk of the grinding stones. Here the air smells of old dry paper, the faint metallic tang of iron, and the subtle lingering ghost of dried lavender, which is kept in small muslin sachets in the corners of the room to deter any curious insects from the wooden shelves. It is a deeply intellectual fragrance reminiscent of a vast forgotten library where ancient manuscripts rest in eternal silence. The walls of this small square room are entirely hidden behind magnificent floor-to-ceiling apothecary cabinets. These cabinets are masterpieces of Renaissance cabinetry crafted from rich, unpolished walnut. The wood possesses a deep chocolate-brown hue, its surface marked by the beautiful swirling patterns of the grain that look like dark rivers flowing through the timber. The cabinets are divided into hundreds of small, perfectly uniform drawers, stacked row upon row, rising like a wooden cliff face into the shadowed ceiling. Each drawer is fitted with a small half-moon pull handle made of cast brass. The brass has tarnished over the years, losing its bright golden shine and settling into a muted, earthy olive green, soft and comforting to the eye. Let us stand before one of these colossal wooden facades and focus on a single drawer resting at chest height. Affixed to the wood just above the brass handle is a small rectangular label made of thick handmade cotton rag paper. The paper has yellowed slightly at the edges, giving it the appearance of aged ivory. Written upon it in flowing, elegant calligraphy using iron gall ink is a single word describing the grade of the pigment within. The ink, originally a stark black, has faded over the years into a warm sepia brown, its edges bleeding ever so slightly into the fibrous texture of the paper. The sweeping loops of the letters are a testament to the care and respect given to every aspect of this craft. Even the labels are works of art, born of patience and steady hands. If you were to gently pull the brass handle, the drawer would slide outward with a soft, incredibly smooth friction of wood moving against wood. It is a hushed whispering sound, shh, that perfectly matches the quietude of the vault. The interior of the drawer is lined with a thick layer of raw, unspun sheep's wool, a cloudy, springy bed designed to absorb any vibration or shock. Nestled within this soft, cream-coloured wool is a single, exquisite vial made of hand-blown Venetian glass from the island of Murano. The glass is not perfectly clear, it has a slight watery ripple to it, and if you look closely you can see tiny microscopic air bubbles known as seed bubbles trapped forever within the frozen liquid of the glass. These tiny imperfections are the signature of the breath that shaped the vessel, a beautiful reminder of the human touch. Inside the glass vial rests the ultimate prize, the purified ultramarine pigment. The powder is so fine, so incredibly delicate, that it behaves almost like a liquid. It fills the bottom half of the vial, presenting a blue of such profound, staggering depth that it seems to absorb all the light in the room. It is a color that pulls you in, an endless, velvety midnight blue that holds the mysteries of the cosmos within its dust. It does not reflect, it radiates an ancient, quiet energy. This is the blue of the Madonna's robes, the blue of twilight skies in grand frescoes, waiting patiently in the dark to be awakened by a painter's brush and a drop of linseed oil. The top of the vial is sealed with a tapered cork pressed firmly into the narrow glass neck to ensure the absolute purity of the pigment. The cork and the lip of the glass are entirely encased in a thick cap of dark crimson sealing wax. The wax is smooth and hard, providing a stark, gorgeous contrast against the blue powder below. Pressed deep into the center of the crimson wax is the intricate impression of the master miller's signet ring, a tiny, perfect relief of the Florentine lily, flanked by the initials of the guild. It is a mark of absolute quality, an oath sworn in wax that the powder within is unadulterated, born of authentic Afghan stone and centuries of guarded knowledge. Moving to another section of the cabinet, we gently open a larger, deeper drawer near the bottom. This space is not lined with wool, but with a piece of heavy, dark velvet that has been worn smooth in the center. Resting upon the velvet are the raw, uncrushed stones of lapis lazuli, exactly as they arrived from the perilous, months-long caravan journey across the Silk Road. These are the stones from the ancient Sar Isang mines in the towering snow-capped mountains of Badakhshan. They are jagged, irregular lumps of rock, heavy with the weight of the earth. To hold one of these raw stones is to hold a fragment of the sky. The surface is a mesmerizing, chaotic tapestry of minerals. The dominant matrix is that deep, impossible blue, but it is heavily marbled with thick, cloudy veins of white calcite, looking like stormy clouds passing across an evening sky. And scattered throughout the stone, catching the dim light of the vault, are brilliant, glittering flecks of golden pyrite. These tiny metallic inclusions sparkle like distant frozen stars embedded in the rock. The stone is incredibly cold against the skin, dense and unyielding, harboring no hint of the soft, ethereal powder it will eventually become. You place the heavy stone back onto its velvet bed, the soft thump of its weight quickly swallowed by the silence of the room. You slide the heavy oak drawer shut, listening to the gentle hiss of the wood sliding back into place, returning the stones to the darkness. Standing in the center of the vault, surrounded by the towering wooden cabinets, you feel a profound sense of completion. You are entirely cocooned in the history of the earth and the pinnacle of human artistry. The cool, dry air slows your breathing, matching it to the eternal, unchanging quiet of the sealed glass vials. The world above is beginning to wake, the Florentine sun is rising, but here, in the deep treasury of shadows, the peaceful night stretches on forever, a deep, continuous blue dream holding you safe in its calm, unshakable embrace. As we gently step out of the absolute sealed darkness of the pigment vault, the architecture of the mill subtly transitions from a space of silent preservation to one of quiet, impending life. The heavy, subterranean chill begins to loosen its grip, yielding to the very faint, grey, pre-dawn light that now filters down through the high, narrow windows of the ground floor. It is in this suspended moment, hovering gracefully between the fading night and the unwritten morning, that the human element of this historical sanctuary finally makes its presence known. From outside the thick wooden doors there comes the slow, rhythmic crunch of footsteps upon the frosted river pebbles. The sound is steady, unhurried, and deeply grounding, the footsteps of a man who has walked this exact path 1,000 times before. This is the master miller, arriving to awaken the sleeping stones and breathe life into the cold, silent workshop. The heavy entrance door groans softly on its iron hinges, a low, drawn-out sound of timber shifting against metal. As the door opens, a swirling eddy of cold, crisp morning air rushes into the room, bringing with it the sharp, unmistakable scent of the river mist and the damp, earthy aroma of the awakening Tuscan soil. The master enters, pulling the door shut behind him with a solid, comforting thud that completely seals off the outside world once more. He is wrapped in a voluminous, heavy cloak woven from raw, undyed sheep's wool. The fabric is thick and stiff, smelling faintly of wood smoke from his home fire and the lanolin that naturally coats the wool, rendering it impervious to the morning dew. As he moves, the heavy folds of the cloak whisper against each other, a soft brushing sound that harmonizes beautifully with the overarching silence of the room. His first task is not to touch the precious stones or engage the massive wooden gears, but to banish the lingering shadows and summon the gentle warmth necessary to begin the day's painstaking labor. He walks with deliberate slowness toward a small recessed alcove built into the thick stone wall near his workbench, a humble, intimate space serving as his personal hearth. He reaches deep into a leather pouch at his belt and retrieves a small oval tinderbox. This object is a marvel of everyday Renaissance utility, crafted from hammered brass that has lost its bright, gaudy shine, mellowing instead into a soft, dull gold. The surface of the brass is intricately etched with scrolling vines, though the grooves are now smoothed and softened by decades of being held in calloused hands. When he opens the small lid of the tinderbox, a faint, dry scent escapes, the smell of ancient dust, of potential energy, and of deeply charred linen. Inside rests a small piece of dark, jagged flint, perfectly shaped to fit the curve of his thumb, and a thick, curved striker forged from high-carbon steel. The steel is dark grey, heavily pitted and scarred along its striking edge from countless thousands of impacts. Beneath these tools lies the charcloth, small squares of pure linen that have been baked in an airless fire until they are entirely blackened and incredibly fragile, capable of catching the most microscopic spark. The master's hands, though thick with age and permanently stained with a faint, ghostly wash of lapis blue in the deepest creases of his knuckles, move with the astonishing precision of a practiced musician. He holds the flint and the charcloth in his left hand, positioning them with absolute unthinking familiarity. In his right hand he grasps the steel striker. With a sharp, sudden downward strike, scritch metal meets stone. The sound is incredibly sharp, a tiny metallic tearing in the quiet air. Instantly, a shower of brilliant white-hot sparks explodes outward, falling like microscopic, dying stars into the dark well of the tinderbox. One single, fortunate spark lands perfectly upon the black velvet of the charcloth. For a breathless second nothing happens, then a tiny glowing ring of intense crimson heat begins to spread across the blackened linen. The master brings the tinderbox close to his face. He purses his lips and blows, exhaling a long, slow, incredibly gentle stream of air over the glowing ember. With each breath, the dull red dot blossoms into a bright, angry orange, illuminating the deep lines of his face and the concentrated, peaceful focus in his eyes. The smell of the burning charcloth is sharp and slightly acrid, a clean, smoky scent that signals the absolute beginning of the day. From a bundle resting on the stone mantel, he snaps off a thin, fragile stalk of dried fennel, its tip dipped in a tiny bead of yellow sulphur. He presses the sulphur tip to the glowing orange ember. There is a soft, immediate hiss, a tiny puff of pale blue smoke that smells strongly of struck matches and earth, and a brilliant teardrop-shaped flame springs to life. The master turns and carries this small, fragile blossom of fire to a terracotta oil lamp resting on the workbench. The lamp is shaped like a shallow, elongated bowl, pinched at one end to form a spout where a thick wick of braided cotton rests, heavy and saturated with fuel. As he touches the burning fennel stalk to the wick, the cotton drinks the flame. It sputters for a fraction of a second, struggling against the heavy oil before catching hold and growing into a steady, luminous golden spear of light. The fuel in the lamp is pure, unrefined olive oil, pressed from the ancient groves growing on the hillsides just outside the city walls. As the oil warms from the heat of the flame, it releases a rich, incredibly heavy fragrance. It is a fruity, slightly peppery scent, thick and comforting, mingling with the lingering ozone of the struck flint to create a deeply historic olfactory tapestry. The golden light from the lamp pushes the shadows back into the corners of the room, casting long, swaying silhouettes of the wooden pillars across the floor, making the stone walls feel suddenly warmer, closer, and infinitely more forgiving. Now the master turns his attention to the hearth itself. Arranged within the shallow, blackened stone recess is a small mound of carefully curated kindling. There are thin, papery strips of birch bark, brittle twigs of dried rosemary that snap with a sharp, clean sound, and thick, gnarled pieces of seasoned olive wood. He places the burning fennel stalk beneath the birch bark. The paper-thin bark catches instantly, curling in upon itself like a dying leaf as a bright, enthusiastic yellow flame begins to climb. The fire speaks in soft, rhythmic pops and crackles as the heat encounters tiny pockets of trapped moisture within the wood. The dry rosemary twigs ignite next, sending a sudden, beautiful wave of herbal, camphor-like incense into the air, instantly clearing the mind and opening the senses. Finally, the fire reaches the dense, heavy chunks of olive wood. This wood does not burn quickly, it smoulders and glows, producing a profound, enduring heat. The smoke that curls up the small stone chimney is entirely different from the sharp scent of the herbs. It is sweet, deeply nutty, and incredibly smooth, filling the alcove with an atmosphere of absolute domestic safety. The master stands before the growing fire, holding his hands out toward the flames. The radiant heat washes over his skin, slowly melting away the lingering chill of the riverbank, preparing his muscles and his spirit for the delicate, demanding work that lies ahead. To complete this solitary morning ritual, he reaches for a small, soot-blackened clay pot resting on a trivet near the flames. Inside the pot is fresh water drawn from the same deep artesian well used to wash the pigments. He swings a small iron arm outward over the fire and suspends the pot above the flames by its wire handle. Next, he takes a small wooden bowl filled with dried leaves gathered from the Tuscan countryside. There are silver-green leaves of mountain sage, fuzzy and soft to the touch, delicate pale yellow chamomile blossoms that smell of sweet hay and warm apples, and sharp, dark green needles of rosemary. He takes a pinch of the mixture and crushes it slowly between his thumb and forefinger, releasing the incredibly potent volatile oils trapped within the dried plants. The friction of his fingers grinding the herbs produces a soft rustling sound like dry autumn leaves blowing across a stone courtyard. He drops the crushed herbs into the warming water. As the heat rises, the water begins to murmur, small pearl-like bubbles forming at the bottom of the clay pot before breaking the surface with gentle popping sounds. A thick, fragrant plume of steam rises from the pot, curling upward into the dim light of the alcove. The scent is intoxicatingly pure, a deeply medicinal, earthy and floral bouquet that speaks of ancient remedies and the quiet wisdom of the soil. The master uses a folded piece of thick linen to lift the hot clay pot, pouring the dark, golden-green infusion into a heavy, unglazed terracotta mug. The mug is thick-walled and slightly uneven, holding the shape of the potter's hands forever in its clay. He wraps both of his hands around the warm vessel, feeling the immense comforting heat radiating through the porous ceramic into his palms. He lifts the mug close to his face, closing his eyes as he inhales the thick herbal steam that fogs the cool air around him. In this incredibly quiet, isolated moment, surrounded by the smell of olive oil, sweet wood smoke and brewing sage, the master miller is perfectly at peace. The machinery of the mill remains silent. The grand demands of the artists in the city are forgotten, and the only reality is the profound, simple comfort of the warmth spreading through his hands, gently ushering in another day in the endless, beautiful pursuit of the perfect blue. With the chill of the morning successfully banished from his bones, the master sets down his empty terracotta mug. The thick herbal steam has entirely dissipated into the vast air of the workshop, leaving behind only the faintest ghost of sage and chamomile lingering in the shadows. He turns away from the comforting, glowing heart of the small fire and begins to walk slowly toward the center of the room. His footsteps on the massive slate floor are deliberate and heavy, echoing slightly against the high vaulted ceiling. We are now approaching the very core of the mill's purpose, moving from the quiet preparation of the man to the awakening of the machinery itself. This is the moment where the raw, unyielding power of nature is first introduced to the stubborn, beautiful resistance of the earth. He stops before the primary grinding trough, the enormous circular basin carved from a single unbroken block of black basalt. The stone is magnificent in its sheer, brutal size, sitting upon a heavy pedestal of granite. It looks less like a tool and more like an ancient altar dedicated to the deep tectonic forces of the world. Within this dark basin rests the runner stone, a thick, perfectly circular disc of bright white Carrara marble. The contrast between the two stones is jarringly beautiful. The basalt absorbs the low morning light while the marble seems to reflect it, glowing with a soft, milky luminescence. The master reaches out and rests his hand flat against the cold, curved surface of the white marble runner. He closes his eyes for a brief moment, not in prayer, but in an act of deep tactile communion. He is feeling for the imperceptible vibrations of the stone, ensuring it sits perfectly balanced upon its iron pivot. The marble is astonishingly smooth, polished to a near-glass finish by years of friction against the crushed lapis, yet it remains incredibly cold to the touch. This stone is heavy, unimaginably heavy, requiring the strength of the river to turn it, yet the master's touch is as light as a falling leaf. Moving with practiced efficiency, he reaches into a large woven willow basket resting on the floor nearby. The basket is lined with a thick layer of soft, unbleached cotton to protect its contents. From within, he pulls out a handful of the raw lapis lazuli stones, the very same stones we observed resting in the velvet-lined drawers of the vault. He does not dump them unceremoniously into the trough. Rather, he places them one by one onto the flat, black surface of the basalt, arranging them with the meticulous care of a jeweler setting diamonds into a crown. Each stone meets the basalt with a sharp, bright clack, a clean mineral sound that echoes sharply in the quiet room. He arranges them in a perfect, continuous circle around the outer edge of the white runner stone, creating a ring of jagged, raw blue and sparkling gold against the dark background. Once the stones are positioned to his satisfaction, he moves away from the trough and walks toward the immense polished oak pillar that stands against the far wall. Attached to this pillar is the main lever, a thick, slightly curved piece of solid iron wrapped tightly in worn brown leather at the handle. This lever is the physical link between the peaceful, silent interior of the workshop and the roaring, relentless energy of the river outside. It controls the sluice gate, the heavy wooden barrier that either holds the river back or allows it to crash against the moss-covered paddles of the great external waterwheel. The master grasps the leather-bound handle with both hands. He pauses, takes a deep breath of the cool, oil-scented air, and pulls the lever downward. It resists for a moment, the heavy iron gears grinding against each other with a low metallic groan before the gate finally yields. The lever slides smoothly down into its locking notch with a definitive heavy thunk. For a single, suspended second, there is absolute silence. And then, the awakening begins. It starts not as a sound, but as a profound vibration beneath your feet. You can feel the sudden, immense weight of the water rushing against the wooden paddles through the thick slate floor. The vibration travels up through the soles of your boots, a deep, continuous tremor that hums within your very bones. Then the sound arrives, a low, thunderous roar from outside, as the Arno is suddenly forced into the narrow channel, crashing over the ancient wood. The sound is muffled by the thick stone walls of the mill, transforming it into a deep, rhythmic, oceanic roar that fills the massive room. Whoosh thump, it is the heartbeat of a giant, suddenly pounding with immense vitality. Inside the workshop, the massive overhead drive shaft, the gargantuan trunk of oak suspended from the ceiling, shudders and begins to turn. It moves incredibly slowly at first, rotating with a tortured, agonizing groan as the wood twists and strains against its bronze bearings. The sound is immense, like the creaking of an ancient galleon's hull riding out a heavy storm. As the shaft gathers momentum, the groaning shifts into a steady, rhythmic wooden whine, accompanied by the wet, squelching sound of the heavy olive oil lubricating the heavy bronze rings. Finally, the immense power of the river reaches the grinding station. The vertical iron shaft connected to the sealing gears engages the white marble runner stone. The runner shudders, violently protesting the sudden command to move before it slowly begins its relentless circular path. The moment the massive weight of the white marble slides over the first jagged piece of raw lapis lazuli, the air is split by a sound that defies description. It is a shattering, tearing scream of earth being crushed. It is the sound of deep geologic time being violently fractured and undone. The marble grinds against the silicate, producing an incredibly loud, high-pitched screeching that reverberates painfully in the enclosed space. It sounds like mountains weeping, a chaotic, agonizing symphony of friction and destruction. The sharp cracks of the stones breaking apart sound like pistol shots echoing in a cavern. Small, sharp shards of lapis lazuli shatter and ricochet off the sides of the black basalt basin, pinging against the stone like chaotic hail. But the master miller does not flinch. He stands beside the trough, his face completely serene, watching the destruction with a calm, appraising eye. He knows that this violent, ear-splitting chaos is absolutely necessary. It is the brutal, unavoidable first step in the long journey toward perfection. The raw stone must be broken, its coarse, physical form destroyed, before its true celestial soul can be released. Slowly, over the course of perhaps 20 incredibly long, loud minutes, the sonic landscape begins to change. The violent shrieking and the sharp, percussive cracking slowly begin to fade. The raw, jagged stones have been pulverized into smaller, more uniform pieces. The harsh, high-pitched scream of stone against stone gradually transitions into a low, deep, guttural growl. It is a heavy, tectonic grinding sound, thick and incredibly resonant. It is the sound of two immense tectonic plates grinding against each other deep within the Earth's crust. As the pieces of lapis lazuli grow smaller and smaller, the sound continues to soften, morphing into a steady, rhythmic crunch hiss. Crunch hiss. It is a sound reminiscent of walking heavily across thick, freshly fallen snow on a fiercely cold morning, or perhaps the sound of coarse sea salt being ground in a giant, heavy mortar. The volume drops significantly, returning a degree of peace to the vast room. The chaotic, flying shards of stone have settled, replaced by a thick, coarse grit that is slowly being pushed around the endless circle by the relentless weight of the marble. The master watches the transformation closely. He reaches for a long-handled wooden scraper, its broad blade carved from dense boxwood. As the heavy runner stone passes, he expertly slides the scraper into the trough, pushing the escaping grit back into the center of the track, ensuring that every fragment of the stone is subjected to the crushing weight. The wood of the scraper sliding against the black basalt produces a soft, sweeping sound, a gentle swish scrape that weaves itself seamlessly into the low, rhythmic growl of the grinding stones. He leans closer to the trough, his eyes fixed on the coarse powder forming within the basin. Even in this early, incredibly rough stage, the magic of the stone is apparent. The pulverized rock is not grey or brown, but a vibrant, deeply saturated indigo. As the heavy white marble slides over the coarse blue grit, it crushes the tiny, sharp edges of the crystals. For a fleeting second, just behind the passing stone, a faint metallic scent rises from the crushed rock, a sharp ozone-like smell, reminiscent of wet lightning and freshly broken slate. The destruction has ceased, replaced by a steady, hypnotic rhythm of transformation. The first violent sacrifice of the stone is complete, and the long, slow, musical dance of purification has finally begun. When the master determines that the initial, brutal crushing has served its purpose, the relentless energy of the room must be temporarily subdued. He walks back to the heavy oak pillar and grasps the leather-bound lever once more. With a slow, deliberate pull upwards, he re-engages the heavy iron locking mechanism, dropping the thick wooden sluice gate outside. The deep, thunderous roar of the Arno crashing against the massive external wheel is instantly choked off, replaced by the chaotic, swirling sound of the river water seeking its natural, unhindered path around the mill. Inside the vast workshop, the deceleration of the machinery is not sudden but a magnificent, drawn-out exhalation. The gargantuan overhead drive shaft continues to rotate on its own immense momentum, its agonizing wooden groans stretching out into long, low sighs that gradually decrease in pitch and frequency. The white marble runner stone in the black basalt basin slows its relentless circular journey, its heavy tectonic grinding softening into a lazy scraping drag, until finally, with a heavy settling thud, the stone comes to a complete and total rest. The silence that rushes back into the room is profound. It is not an empty silence, but a heavy, saturated quiet, vibrating with the aftershocks of the expended energy. The air above the grinding trough is thick with a localized suspension of coarse blue dust, catching the morning light and creating a soft azure haze over the black stone. To gather this freshly crushed material, the master turns to a tool of exquisite, contrasting delicacy. From a row of implements hanging by leather loops upon the wall, he selects a sweeping brush. The handle of this brush is carved from wild cherry wood, a timber that has aged into a deep, warm, reddish brown. The wood is incredibly smooth, polished to a mirror-like finish by the natural oils of his palm, and it possesses a soft, undulating curve that fits the contours of his hand with intimate perfection. The bristles of this brush are not made from coarse hog bristle or stiff plant fibre, but from the incredibly soft, pliant belly hair of a badger. These hairs are long and beautifully banded, pale grey at the base, shifting to a stark black in the centre and tapering to microscopic silvery white tips. They are gathered tightly at the base and bound to the wooden handle by thin overlapping wraps of brass wire that have tarnished to a dull mustard yellow. If you were to run your thumb across the tips of these bristles, they would offer almost no resistance, bending completely under the slightest pressure, feeling softer than a whispered breath against the skin. He approaches the basalt trough and begins the painstaking process of gathering the pulverized lapis lazuli. He sweeps the brush across the bottom of the black basin with a slow, sweeping motion. The sound is incredibly soothing, a soft, dry, whispering hush, hush. Thush as the badger hairs coax the coarse blue grit into a single gathering mound. The brush is so delicate that it does not scratch the stone, it merely glides over the surface, sweeping up every precious fragment, every tiny shattered crystal of blue and gold. The grit responds to the brush, rolling and sliding against itself with a faint microscopic rustling sound like the shifting of dry sand dunes in a gentle breeze. Once the powder is gathered into a small, vibrant mountain against the side of the trough, he retrieves a shallow, half-moon-shaped scoop made of pure copper. The handle of the scoop is wrapped in worn twine, but the belly of the metal is exposed, gleaming with a warm, pinkish-orange hue that provides a stunning visual contrast against the deep indigo of the gathered stone. He presses the flat edge of the scoop against the basalt, and uses the brush to sweep the heavy coarse powder into the metal basin. As the crushed stone slides across the copper, it produces a distinct, incredibly satisfying sound, a metallic tink, tink, as the heavier fragments of pyrite and uncrushed quartz strike the basin. Carrying the heavily laden copper scoop, the master walks toward a dedicated wooden table situated beneath one of the narrow eastern-facing windows. The morning sun has now fully crested the horizon, and a solitary, unbroken shaft of pale golden light pierces the dimness of the mill, illuminating this specific workstation with theatrical brilliance. Resting flat upon the scarred maple surface of the table is a large, perfectly square sheet of vellum. This is not ordinary paper, but specially prepared calfskin, stretched and scraped until it is impossibly thin and smooth. The vellum is a rich, creamy ivory colour, and if you look closely at its surface, you can still trace the faint, ghostly maps of the animal's veins running through the translucent material. It smells faintly of dry chalk and old bound books, a scholarly, quiet fragrance that perfectly suits the task at hand. Suspended just a few inches above the vellum, resting upon a simple wooden stand, is the sieve. This tool is a masterpiece of tension and simplicity. The frame is a perfect circle of ash wood, harvested straight and green, then slowly bent using steam until the two ends overlap and are secured with tiny wooden pegs. The wood is light and springy, retaining a faint, sweet smell of the forest sap. Stretched across the bottom of this wooden hoop is a piece of incredibly fine, unbleached silk. This silk was woven on the intricate looms of Venice, utilizing threads so thin they are virtually invisible to the naked eye. The fabric is pulled taut across the frame, secured by a thin ribbon of leather binding the outer edge. The tension is perfect. If you were to flick the center of the silk with your fingernail, it would produce a faint resonant thrum, like a tiny muted drum. The master gently tips the copper scoop, allowing the coarse, crushed lapis lazuli to cascade onto the center of the taut silk. The sound of the stones hitting the fabric is a soft, muffled scratching, like dry leaves falling upon a frozen pond. The weight of the raw powder causes the silk to sag ever so slightly in the middle, creating a shallow, vibrant blue depression. Now the hypnotic rhythm of the separation begins. The master does not shake the sieve violently. Instead, he places his left hand lightly upon the edge of the wooden hoop to stabilize it. With his right hand, he uses a short, thick dowel of polished bone to tap rhythmically against the side of the wooden frame. The sound is sharp and woody, a steady, percussive heartbeat that echoes softly in the quiet alcove. The vibration from each tap travels instantly through the ashwood ring and across the microscopic tension of the silk threads. This invisible vibration causes the coarse powder resting upon the fabric to dance. The heavier, uncrushed fragments of grey calcite and golden pyrite bounce and skitter across the surface, unable to pass through the incredibly tight weave. But the finest dust, the pulverized lazurite that has been completely separated from the host rock, finds its way through the microscopic gaps in the silk. Below the sieve, in the shaft of golden morning light, a miracle occurs. The fine blue dust falls through the silk like a gentle, localized rainstorm. Because the particles are so incredibly small and light, they do not fall straight down. They drift and swirl, catching the microscopic air currents created by the tapping of the bone dowel. In the sunlight, this falling dust looks like a column of pure azure magic. It is a slow-moving, heavy mist of deep ultramarine, settling completely silently upon the ivory surface of the vellum below. As the master continues his steady, unhurried tapping, a perfect conical mountain of blue begins to form upon the cream-colored parchment. The contrast between the stark white background and the intensely saturated velvety blue of the sifted powder is breathtaking. This fine dust holds no reflection, no glittering pyrite. It is entirely matte, absorbing the morning light and radiating a soft, profound depth. You can watch the tiny avalanches of powder cascading down the sides of the growing blue cone, completely silent, a microscopic geological event happening right before your eyes. The smell in this small alcove shifts subtly as the sifting continues. The friction of the stone against the silk releases a very faint, dry, mineral chalkiness into the air, mingling beautifully with the scent of the vellum and the sweet, woody aroma of the steam-bent ash frame. The master's face is close to the falling powder, his breathing shallow and controlled to avoid disturbing the delicate drift of the blue rain. He is completely lost in the rhythm of the tap. Tap, tap, a moving meditation of sound and gravity. The rest of the world has faded away entirely. There is only the wooden hoop, the transparent silk, the golden sunlight, and the slow, patient accumulation of the heavens upon a piece of ancient calfskin. You stand beside him in the quiet warmth of the light, mesmerized by the falling blue dust, feeling your own thoughts become as fine and weightless as the powder drifting silently down to the earth. The conical mountain of perfect ultramarine dust resting upon the vellum is a triumph of patience, but it is not yet the final pigment. The delicate powder, though separated from the coarsest rock, still harbors invisible thieves, microscopic fragments of dull calcite and stubborn pyrite that cling desperately to the lazurite. To banish these final impurities, the master must engage in a forgotten, almost magical tradition of 16th century chemistry, the creation of the pastiglia, the binding dough. He carefully lifts the four corners of the calfskin vellum, gathering it into a makeshift pouch. The blue powder shifts and slides within, settling softly into the depression with a muted, velvety rustle. Carrying this precious bundle, he moves away from the sunlit sifting table and returns to the shadowed alcove where we earlier observed the heavy oak work table. The air here remains perfectly still, holding its breath in anticipation of the delicate alchemy to come. He gently places the vellum bundle upon the table, unrolling the edges so the blue mountain is once again revealed, resting safely beside the unlit iron brazier and the waiting copper cauldron. Before the fire can be awakened in the brazier, the ingredients of the binding matrix must be meticulously prepared. The master reaches for the small leather pouch containing the tiers of gum mastic. He unties the thin leather thong that secures it, the stiff hide resisting slightly before loosening with a soft leathery creak. Pouring a small handful of the tiers onto his palm, he inspects them in the dim light. They look like frozen dewdrops, pale and slightly frosted, possessing a fragile, brittle beauty. These tears are the hardened sap of the mastic tree, brought across the Mediterranean from the rocky, sun-drenched shores of Chios. He transfers the tears into the basin of a small mortar carved from a single block of white alabaster. The stone is incredibly smooth and translucent at its edges, glowing with a milky internal warmth. He takes up the matching alabaster pestle. Its handle is perfectly contoured, ending in a blunt, rounded head. As he presses the pestle down onto the brittle tears, the silence of the alcove is broken by a sharp, incredibly satisfying crack. Splinter, crack. The sound is crisp and clean, like walking on thin ice over a shallow winter puddle. He begins to grind the pestle in a slow circular motion against the sides of the mortar. The sound shifts to a gritty, high-pitched skirt, a rhythmic scraping that reduces the crystalline tears into a fine, cloudy white powder. As the mastic breaks down, it releases a sharp, deeply refreshing fragrance. It smells incredibly clean, a bright, piney citrus note mixed with the scent of sun-baked earth and coastal winds. It cuts through the heavy, stagnant air of the mill like a blade of fresh silver light. With the mastic perfectly powdered, he turns his attention to the small iron brazier. From the remnants of his morning hearth fire, he transfers 3 glowing cherry-red coals using a pair of long black iron tongs. He places them carefully into the belly of the brazier. The coals hiss softly as they settle against the cold iron grate, their intense, localized heat instantly warming the space directly above them. He does not want a roaring fire. He needs a gentle, coaxing warmth, a slow fire that will melt the resins without scorching their delicate, volatile oils. He places the beautifully hammered copper cauldron upon the iron grate directly above the glowing coals. First, he introduces the beeswax. He takes a large golden cake and breaks it into smaller chunks with his thumbs. The wax snaps with a dull, muffled sound, leaving slightly jagged, honey-colored edges exposed to the air. As the chunks hit the heated copper basin, they immediately begin to weep. A tiny, sizzling hiss arises, and the bottom edges of the wax melt into a clear, golden liquid. The heavy, intoxicatingly sweet scent of summer flowers and honeycomb surges upward, filling the alcove with a thick, syrupy perfume. Next, he adds the chunks of translucent pine rosin. They fall into the melting wax with soft, sticky thuds. The rosin takes longer to surrender to the heat. It slowly softens, its sharp edges rounding off, before melting into a thick amber syrup that swirls together with the swirling beeswax. The aroma deepens into a magnificent, complex fragrance, the heavy sweetness of the wax grounded by the sharp, ancient, resinous bite of deep, shadowed pine forests. Finally, he sprinkles the powdered white mastic over the bubbling golden pool. The white dust dissolves instantly upon contact, acting as the magical chemical binder that perfectly marries the wax and the pine resin into a single cohesive sticky matrix. Now comes the moment of profound transformation. The master uses a folded piece of thick wool to lift the hot copper cauldron from the heat, setting it securely onto a thick, cork-lined wooden trivet resting on the oak table. The molten mixture inside is a deep, glowing liquid gold, bubbling lazily with tiny popping sighs. He takes the vellum sheet and carefully, deliberately pours the mountain of purified lapis lazuli dust directly into the hot liquid resins. The visual impact is shocking and incredibly beautiful. As the velvety midnight blue powder cascades into the golden liquid, the colors clash and swirl, creating a cosmic storm of indigo and amber within the copper bowl. The blue dust is initially reluctant to sink, floating on the surface of the thick syrup like dark storm clouds gathering over a golden sea. The master takes up a heavy, flat wooden spatula, carved from close-grained boxwood, and begins to stir. He moves the spatula with slow, powerful, continuous circles. Shh, glup. Shh, glup. The sound is thick, wet, and incredibly heavy. As he forces the blue powder down into the sticky golden matrix, the liquid begins to violently change state. It darkens instantly, the sheer volume of the blue overpowering the gold, completely swallowing the light. The mixture becomes a deep, glossy, inky black blue, looking like the surface of a starless ocean at midnight. The consistency thickens dramatically with every rotation of the spatula, transforming from a fluid syrup into a dense, unyielding paste. The master's forearm muscles flex with the effort, the physical resistance of the dough increasing exponentially as it cools and binds. The hot resins latch onto the stone dust, entirely encapsulating every microscopic particle in a sticky, waterproof embrace. When the spatula can no longer easily move through the incredibly dense mass, the master prepares the final resting place for the dough. Beside the copper cauldron lies a thick rectangular slab of perfectly polished, cool grey marble. He coats the surface of the marble with a few drops of pure linseed oil, rubbing it in with a piece of linen to create a slick, gleaming surface that will prevent the pastiglia from permanently sticking. Using the heavy wooden spatula, he pries the dark, heavy mass out of the copper cauldron. It falls onto the oiled marble with a heavy, wet, deeply satisfying smack. The dough is a sight to behold. It is a solid, glossy lump of impossibly dark blue, radiating a profound, fragrant heat into the cool air of the alcove. It looks less like paint and more like a chunk of the night sky itself, plucked from the heavens and warmed by an earthly fire. The master coats his own hands lightly in the linseed oil. He presses the heels of his palms into the dark, hot mass. He leans his body weight into the marble, slowly, deliberately pushing the dough outward, flattening it against the cool stone. The dough resists, possessing a stiff, rubbery elasticity that pushes back against his palms. He folds the thick edges back into the center, pressing down again. Press, fold, press, fold. It is a rhythmic, silent, intensely physical process. The intense heat from the dough transfers directly to his hands, warming his joints, while the cool marble beneath constantly regulates the temperature, preventing the resins from becoming entirely solid and unworkable. As he continues this patient kneading, the ingredients become perfectly, flawlessly homogenized. The pastiglia is no longer just a loose mixture of parts. It is a single, unified entity, a dark, fragrant, celestial putty. It sits upon the grey marble slab, a heavy, silent testament to the tedious alchemy of the morning, holding the promise of absolute, uncorrupted blue safely within its sticky golden heart, waiting patiently for the cold, clear waters of the settling vats to finally sing it back to life. The journey of the lapis lazuli is a continuous rhythmic pendulum swing between the brutal and the gentle, the hot and the cold, the incredibly dry and the profoundly wet. The heavy dark mass of the pastiglia, the alchemist's dough, has cooled slightly upon the oiled marble slab, its surface shifting from a liquid gloss to a smooth, rubbery, matted finish. It no longer burns to the touch, but rather emanates a deep, sustained, comforting warmth, holding the memory of the brazier's coals safely within its dense, resinous core. The master lifts this heavy, dark loaf from the table. It is surprisingly weighty, feeling denser than a piece of solid lead, burdened by the immense quantity of pulverized stone trapped tightly within the matrix of beeswax and pine rosin. He cradles it in both of his hands, his palms still slick with a sheer, microscopic film of linseed oil, and turns his back on the fading heat of the dry alcove. He begins the slow, deliberate walk back down the narrow, gently sloping passageway leading to the chamber of the settling vats. With every step upon the damp terracotta tiles, the ambient temperature drops, drawing away the heat from his skin. The air grows remarkably heavier, losing the dry, powdery quality of the grinding floor, and taking on the rich, mineral-heavy dampness of a hidden subterranean grotto. The scent of the crushed herbs and burning olive wood from his morning hearth is entirely washed away, replaced by the stark, incredibly clean alkaline fragrance of pure undisturbed spring water and cold weeping stone walls. He arrives back in the vaulted settling room where the faint grey daylight struggles to penetrate the small deep-set windows, leaving the chamber swathed in a perpetual aquatic twilight. He approaches the very first of the massive, brilliant white majolica vats. The water resting inside this ceramic basin has been drawn straight from the deep earth, undisturbed and perfectly still. It is a breathtakingly clear, unblemished mirror, reflecting the heavy shadowed curves of the stone ceiling above. If you were to look closely at the surface, you would see no floating dust, no microscopic ripples, not a single imperfection. It is a pool of absolute liquid silence. The master stands before the vat, holding the warm black-blue dough above the pristine water. He allows himself a single, long, centering breath. The physical contrast he is about to experience is severe, a necessary shock that will force the matrix to surrender its captive treasure. The water is incredibly cold, carrying the bone-deep chill of the sunless aquifers from which it was drawn, while the dough in his hands still pulses with the heavy, heavy heat of the melted amber and wax. He closes his eyes, leans forward over the thick, rounded edge of the ceramic bowl, and slowly, gently lowers his hands directly into the crystal-clear pool. The tactile shock is immediate and profound. As the icy water closes over his wrists, a sudden sharp thrill of cold rushes up his forearms, raising the tiny hairs on his skin and sending a wave of electric vibrating energy through his muscles. The contrast between the freezing water and the warm dough trapped between his palms is wonderfully jarring. Because his hands are coated in the thin sheen of linseed oil, the water does not immediately wet his skin. Instead, it beads and slips around his fingers in tiny silvery ribbons of air, creating a fascinating, fleeting barrier between his flesh and the chill. Beneath the surface, the water magnifies and distorts the shape of his hands and the dark mass of the dough, making them appear larger, softer, and strangely disembodied in the wavering light. He presses the heavy pastiglia down until it rests completely against the smooth, gently curving bottom of the glazed white basin. The absolute silence of the room is finally broken by a very soft, wet slosh as the displaced water rises slightly up the sides of the bowl. Now the intricate, rhythmic dance of extraction begins. He does not use the heavy olive wood kneading sticks yet. This first, most delicate wash requires the intimate, sensitive intelligence of human fingertips. He begins to massage the dough entirely underwater. He presses the heels of his palms deeply into the dark mass, pushing it flat against the cold ceramic. Then folding the edges back inward with his fingers, press, fold, press, fold. The physical resistance of the dough underwater is astonishing. The sudden plunge into the freezing liquid causes the beeswax and pine rosin to rapidly stiffen, fighting back against the pressure of his hands with a tough, rubbery elasticity. It feels as though he is trying to knead a solid block of cold muscle. The effort requires his entire upper body, his shoulders rolling with the heavy, sustained pushing motion. The water in the vat begins to move, sloshing gently, rhythmically against the bright white sides of the basin. Sploosh, swish, sploosh, swish. The sound is incredibly deeply soothing, reminiscent of a calm, lazy tide gently lapping against the hull of an anchored wooden boat in a quiet harbour at midnight. It is a wet, heavy, rhythmic lullaby that completely fills the low-vaulted room, drowning out the faint, distant memories of the noisy, grinding stones. For the first few minutes, nothing happens to the clarity of the water. The master works the dough tirelessly, his hands turning red from the sustained, biting cold of the spring water, and then the magic of the chemistry slowly reveals itself. The sticky, hydrophobic matrix of wax, rosin, and mastic acts as an incredibly selective trap. It clings desperately, fiercely to the dull, heavy impurities, the grey calcite, the worthless silicates, and the glittering, jagged fragments of golden pyrite. It refuses to let them go. But the pure, celestial particles of lazurite, the true essence of the blue, are hydrophilic. They love the water. Under the immense physical pressure of the kneading, these microscopic blue particles begin to slip free from the sticky trap. From the dark, unyielding mass of the dough, a single, incredibly thin tendril of colour escapes. It twists upward through the clear, icy water like a ribbon of heavy, indigo smoke drifting from a snuffed candle. It is a mesmerizing, utterly hypnotic sight. The master continues his steady, rhythmic kneading, and more color begins to bleed from the dough. The solitary tendril becomes a dozen, then 100. The water directly above his hands is suddenly filled with swirling, chaotic clouds of pure, vibrant ultramarine. The blue is staggering in its intensity. It is a color so rich, so deeply saturated, that it almost seems to vibrate within the water. As his hands move, they push the clouds of pigment outward, sending thick, rolling banks of blue fog across the previously clear basin. Against the stark, flawless white background of the Majolica glaze, the contrast is breathtaking. The water transforms into a dynamic living painting, a slow-motion explosion of lapis lazuli dust blooming outward in gorgeous, overlapping, translucent waves. The physical sensation of the water changes as the pigment floods into it. The pure, crystalline liquid suddenly feels heavier, thicker, slightly silky to the touch as millions of microscopic stone particles become suspended within it. The master's hands, pushing and folding the stiffening dough, become entirely obscured, lost in the impenetrable depths of the swirling blue fog. The scent rising from the vat changes as well. The sharp, clean smell of the spring water is now married to a deeply earthy, profoundly mineral fragrance. The scent of wet stone, crushed ancient seabeds, and the faintest, ghostly, lingering memory of the sweet floral beeswax from the dough. It is the raw, pure smell of creation. The blue bloom continues to expand, rolling and twisting in incredibly complex fluid geometries, until the water in the massive ceramic basin is completely uniformly opaque. It is no longer water. It has become a contained, liquid universe of pure, unadulterated midnight sky. The master knows exactly when to stop. If he kneads the dough for too long or with too much violent force, the matrix will begin to break down entirely, releasing the trapped, dull grey impurities into the pristine blue water, completely ruining the perfection of the first wash. This initial extraction is known as the Fra Angelico grade, the absolute finest, purest, and most vibrantly beautiful pigment that the stone can possibly yield. It is the color reserved only for the robes of the Virgin Mary, the color that artists will wait months to receive and pay for with pure, heavy gold. The master's hands slow their rhythmic underwater dance. He gently gathers the tough, stiffened mass of the pastiglia into a single, cohesive lump at the bottom of the vat. His hands are completely numb from the freezing water, his fingers stiff and aching, yet a profound sense of peaceful satisfaction radiates through his posture. He slowly, carefully lifts his blue-stained hands up from the depths, the thick, heavy water dripping from his fingertips with soft musical plops that echo gently against the damp walls. He leaves the heavy, dark dough resting at the very bottom of the basin, completely hidden beneath the impenetrable veil of the ultramarine water. The sloshing waves gradually subside, the water returning to a state of perfect, glass-like stillness, though it is no longer clear. It is a vat of pure, liquid sapphire, completely silent, waiting patiently for gravity to begin its long, unimaginably slow work of pulling the celestial dust down out of suspension, ensuring the first perfect treasure of the mill is finally, peacefully secured. Stepping back from the thick, curved edge of the white ceramic vat, the master allows his arms to hang loosely by his sides. The profound, biting chill of the subterranean spring water has seeped deep into the joints of his fingers, leaving his hands completely numb, heavy and stiff. He turns away from the pool of liquid sapphire, leaving the quiet magic of gravity to perform its long, invisible work in the dark. As he walks back up the gently sloping passageway, the transition from the damp, heavy air of the washing chamber to the drier, warmer atmosphere of the main grinding floor is a slow, deeply comforting embrace. The heavy, unyielding slate beneath his wet leather boots feels strangely grounding after the intense, aquatic focus of the extraction. His hands, holding the cold memory of the water, are painted in a beautiful, chaotic mosaic of color. The skin is pruned and pale, but deeply stained across the knuckles, beneath the fingernails, and deep within the lifelines of his palms with a vibrant, ghostly wash of ultramarine and the sticky, golden-brown residue of the pine resin. Before he can tend to the needs of his own body, he must perform the daily, meticulous ritual of cleansing his hands. This is not a rushed affair, but a deliberate sensory habit honed over decades of working with stubborn, clinging materials. He approaches a small, dedicated washstand situated near the dying embers of his morning hearth. Resting upon a simple, three-legged wooden stool is a shallow basin made of hammered brass. The metal is dull and heavily oxidized, completely lacking the bright polish of a wealthy merchant's home. Yet it possesses a beautiful, warm, utilitarian dignity. Beside the basin rests a small spherical flask of thick green glass, plugged with a twist of oiled parchment. He unplugs the flask with his teeth and tips it over his upturned palms, pouring out a small pool of raw, unrefined olive oil. The oil is thick and deeply golden, smelling intensely of crushed green grass and warm earth. He sets the flask down and begins to rub the oil vigorously into his skin. The sound is a soft, wet, slick, 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 accompanied by a gentle squelching as the heavy oil mixes with the stubborn remaining bits of the pastiglia dough clinging to his flesh. The natural fats in the olive oil act as a brilliant, gentle solvent, slowly dissolving the tough pine rosin and the sticky beeswax without stripping the skin of its own protective moisture. The intense friction of his palms rubbing together generates a wonderful localized heat, slowly driving the numbing chill of the spring water out from his stiff joints, bringing the warm, tingling rush of blood back to his fingertips. Once the resins are thoroughly dissolved, he reaches for a heavy, irregular block of soap resting on a small slate tile. This soap is a masterpiece of rustic 16th-century domestic chemistry born of the Tuscan countryside. It is roughly cut, hard as a stone, and a mottled, cloudy cream colour. It is made from rendered sheep's tallow, ash from the olive wood fires, and fine grey pumice stone ground down from the distant volcanic slopes. Woven through the hard block are tiny dried flecks of wild rosemary and lavender. He dips the soap briefly into the brass basin of water and works it furiously between his oiled hands. The lather it produces is not light and frothy, but dense, heavy, and incredibly thick. The fine pumice acts as a micro-abrasive, gently scrubbing away the blue dust trapped deep in the pores of his skin. The fragrance that rises from the lather is incredibly clean and sharp, the medicinal, camphor-like bite of the rosemary perfectly balanced by the sweet, soothing floral note of the lavender and the underlying, honest scent of clean wood ash. He plunges his heavily lathered hands into the cool water of the brass basin. The water instantly turns a cloudy, milky pale blue, swirling with the released oils and the final, microscopic ghosts of the pigment. He rinses his skin thoroughly, enjoying the crisp, pure sensation of the water rushing over his warmed fingers to dry his hands. He takes a length of rough-hewn, homespun linen hanging from a wooden peg on the wall. The fabric is unbleached and highly textured, its surface covered in tiny, coarse nubs of raw flax. Pressing the linen firmly against his skin, he feels the invigorating, slightly scratchy friction of the cloth soaking up the moisture. The scent of the linen is dry and slightly dusty, smelling of the sun and the open fields, a perfect earthy conclusion to the wet, mineral-heavy work of the morning. With his hands finally clean and warm, the low, quiet rumble of his own hunger makes itself known. The intense physical exertion of the cold water kneading has demanded its toll, and it is time to break the fast. He walks toward a small, simple wooden hutch tucked into the shadows beneath the heavy oak staircase. The door of the hutch squeaks softly on dry leather hinges as he pulls it open. The interior smells of dried herbs, cured meat, and the deeply comforting yeasty aroma of baked flour. He reaches in and withdraws the staple of Florentine survival, a large, round loaf of pane toscano, the traditional, strictly unsalted bread of the region. The loaf is heavy and substantial, its crust a deep, wood-fired mahogany, dusted with a fine, powdery layer of stark white flour. It is not perfectly round, but delightfully misshapen, bearing the unique charred birthmarks of the brick oven floor where it was baked the afternoon before. He carries the bread to the worn maple workbench where the morning sunlight continues to spill through the narrow window. From a small leather sheath at his belt, he draws a folding knife. The handle of the knife is made from polished ox horn, naturally colored in beautiful swirling streaks of translucent honey and opaque black. The blade is short, thick, and forged from dark carbon steel, honed to a wicked, razor-sharp edge. He places the loaf against his chest, tucking it securely under his left arm, a timeless rustic posture of the working man. With a swift, practiced motion, he draws the steel blade toward himself, slicing directly through the thick, unyielding crust. The sound of the knife breaching the bread is magnificent. It is a loud, incredibly crisp crack crunch, followed by a soft, tearing sigh as the blade moves through the dense, chewy interior crumb. Small, brittle shards of the dark crust flake off and flutter down onto the wooden table like dry autumn leaves. The interior of the bread is revealed, a pale ivory-colored sponge, riddled with large, glossy, irregular air pockets created by the slow, patient fermentation of the wild yeast. Because it lacks salt, the aroma of the bread is singularly pure. It smells entirely of toasted wheat, sweet yeast, and the faint, smoky memory of the oak fire that baked it. It is a humble, honest smell, entirely devoid of artifice or luxury. To accompany the bread, he takes a small ceramic cruet from the hutch. This contains the olio nuovo, the new oil from the very first pressing of the autumn harvest. The oil is a stunning, vibrant, almost unnatural shade of emerald green, so thick it pours with the heavy, syrupy slowness of liquid velvet. He drizzles a generous amount over the porous surface of the sliced bread. The golden green liquid instantly pools in the hollow air pockets before slowly, richly soaking into the pale crumb, turning it a beautiful, saturated yellow. He takes a clove of raw, pungent garlic, slices the very tip off with his knife, and rubs the exposed wet flesh quickly across the rough toasted crust of the bread. The sharp, fiery, intensely savory scent of the garlic blooms instantly in the air, mingling beautifully with the grassy, peppery aroma of the fresh olive oil. He does not sit to eat. He stands by the window, entirely bathed in the warming shaft of the morning sun, and takes a slow, deliberate bite. The sensory experience is profound. First comes the incredible tooth-shattering crunch of the thick wood-fired crust. This gives way to the dense, chewy, satisfying resistance of the bread itself. The absolute lack of salt in the dough perfectly highlights the incredibly sharp, spicy, almost bitter kick of the green olive oil and the raw, stinging heat of the garlic. It is a meal of extreme contrasting textures and powerful, elemental flavors. He chews slowly, rhythmically, his jaw working the dense bread as his eyes drift out through the narrow, leaded glass window, looking out over the misty expanse of the river Arno. As he stands there completely lost in the simple, perfect pleasure of the bread and the oil, a sound drifts across the water, traveling through the cool morning air. It is the deep, resonant tolling of a bronze bell from the heart of the city, perhaps the great bell of Giotto's Campanile or the older, more sombre voice of the Badia Fiorentina. Dong, dong, dong. The sound is muffled by the distance and the lingering river mist, transformed from a sharp, commanding clang into a soft, rolling, melancholic hum. It is a slow, hypnotic rhythm that vibrates faintly against the glass of the window. The bell signals the awakening of Florence, calling the merchants to the markets, the monks to their prayers, and the city to its chaotic, vibrant life. But here, within the thick stone walls of the Lapis Lazuli Mill, the bell holds no authority. It is merely a distant musical reminder of a world that exists far away from the quiet, slow, beautiful alchemy of the blue dust. The master listens to the fading echoes of the bronze, swallows the last oil-soaked bite of his bread, and finds himself perfectly, wonderfully anchored in the profound peace of his own silent, sunlit sanctuary. With the distant echo of the bronze city bell finally fading into the quiet, rhythmic rustle of the river Arno, the master turns his back to the eastern window. The sharp, golden light of the breaking dawn has begun to soften and widen, spreading a warm, honeyed, diffuse glow across the expansive slate floor of the mill. He steps away from the heavy maple workbench and moves toward a shadowed, intimate alcove tucked securely beneath the massive timber staircase. This space is dedicated not to the physical crushing of stone, but to the quiet, administrative soul of his craft. Here stands the counting desk, a tall, slanted scritoio constructed from thick panels of dark, heavily burled walnut. The wood is ancient and imposing, its surface deeply scarred by the erratic slips of sharp knives and permanently stained with the overlapping abstract ghosts of spilled ink and dripped sealing wax. The desk is deliberately designed for standing, requiring a straight, attentive posture that honors the profoundly serious nature of the ledger. You can easily smell the deep, resinous odor of the aged walnut, mingling beautifully with the dry, dusty scent of old parchment and the faint underlying metallic tang of oxidized iron residing within the glass inkwells. Resting precisely in the center of the slanted surface is the master's ledger, the heavy, silent memory of the Lapis Lazuli Mill. It is a massive rectangular tome entirely bound in pale cream-coloured pigskin that has darkened and smoothed over the years from the constant daily touch of oily hands. The spine is incredibly thick, ribbed with heavy hidden cords that hold the signatures of paper together in a tight, unyielding grip. To protect the precious, irreplaceable records from the pervasive dampness of the river valley, the corners of the book are capped in beautifully shaped triangles of hammered brass. The heavy covers are held firmly shut by two thick, stiff leather straps ending in ornate brass clasps. The master reaches out and flips the brass latches upward. The metal moves with a soft, dull clack, a profoundly satisfying sound that releases the tightly held tension of the leather binding. As he folds the heavy front cover open, the massive book exhales. Tiny, entirely invisible cloud of dry, historic dust rises into the shaft of ambient light, carrying the deeply comforting aroma of dried cotton rag, old rabbit skin sizing paste, and the unmistakable sweet papery decay of aging documents. The pages within are a breathtaking masterpiece of the Renaissance papermaker's art, crafted meticulously in the renowned neighbouring mills of Fabriano. They are incredibly thick, possessing a soft, yielding texture that feels much closer to a piece of fine woven fabric than to modern parchment. The edges of the pages are deckled, naturally rough and uneven, beautifully feathered where the wet cotton pulp met the brass wire mesh of the artisan's mould. If you were to hold one of these heavy pages up to the morning light, you would clearly see the faint, translucent watermark of the paper gild pressed forever into the interlocking fibres. To his right, resting securely in a small circular hollow carved directly into the walnut desk, sits the inkwell. It is a heavy, squat cylinder of dark green glass topped with a hinged lid of blackened pewter. The master flicks the pewter lid open with his thumb. Inside rests the iron gall ink, a liquid of absolute darkness and beautiful destructive chemistry. It is brewed slowly from crushed oak galls, the hard, woody spheres formed by wasps upon oak trees, mixed with iron sulfate and sweet, sticky gum arabic. The smell of the ink is wonderfully sharp, acidic, and deeply astringent, smelling of wet iron, crushed tannins, and the damp, shadowed floor of an ancient, undisturbed forest. Beside the green glass inkwell lies his writing instrument, not a simple common goose quill, but a magnificent, incredibly long feather taken from the wing of a white swan. The feather is striking in its elegance, the central shaft thick and glowing with a pearlescent, translucent ivory sheen. The barbs of the feather are impeccably groomed, soft and completely uniform, curving gracefully toward the delicate tip. However, the nib has grown slightly blunt from the previous day's extensive accounting. The master retrieves a small, incredibly delicate penknife with a handle of polished, dark oxbone. He holds the heavy swan quill in his left hand, angling the tip upward to catch the ambient light. With a series of short, remarkably precise, and highly practiced movements, he carves a fresh nib. The sharp blade slices through the hardened keratin of the feather shaft with a crisp, incredibly satisfying snick. Snick. He makes a tiny vertical slit down the exact center of the newly formed point to allow the dark ink to flow perfectly onto the page. The sound of the small blade shaping the feather is microscopic yet intense, a quiet, surgical operation performed in the hushed, deeply peaceful stillness of the stone room. He dips the freshly carved point of the swan quill into the dark well of the green glass. The ink clings eagerly to the nib, forming a heavy, trembling droplet of absolute bottomless black. He brings the feather to the rough, highly textured surface of the Fabriano paper. As the nib touches down, the silence of the room is immediately replaced by the most hypnotic, rhythmic sound of the 16th century world, the steady scratching of the quill, scritch, scratch, shh, scratch. The sound is dry, frictional, and deeply comforting, entirely devoid of haste. It is a sound that naturally demands a slow, even breath from anyone listening. He writes with a flowing, elegant, humanist cursive recording the exact date, the heavy weight of the raw stones crushed that morning, and the expected highly guarded yield of the Fra Angelico grade currently resting beneath the cold water of the settling vats. The iron gall ink goes onto the thick paper as a dark, bruised purplish black, but as it meets the air and the alkaline fibers of the cotton rag, it slowly, magically begins to oxidize, shifting into a deep, permanent, rust-tinged brown. He is not merely keeping domestic accounts, he is participating in the forgotten solemn tradition of the Guild of St. Luke, ensuring that every precious ounce of the celestial blue is tracked, honored, and bound securely to the living history of the city. With the dark ink beginning to dry upon the thick page, he wipes the delicate nib of the swan quill clean with a small, heavily stained scrap of coarse linen, and closes the heavy brass clasps of the ledger. Click. The quiet memory of the morning is sealed. But the administrative work of the mill is only half complete. The finished, purified pigment, once completely dry and sifted, cannot be handed to the master painters in simple paper wraps or fragile glass vials for the chaotic environments of their studios. It must be protected by a vessel as resilient and natural as the stone itself. He walks slowly toward a series of wooden pegs driven deep into the masonry wall near the cooling hearth. Hanging from these worn pegs are bunches of small, carefully cured pig bladders. These incredibly humble organic objects are the traditional, completely forgotten transport vessels for oil paints and precious pigments of the Renaissance era. They are astonishingly tough, entirely waterproof, and absolutely capable of keeping the corrupting air away from the delicate blue dust. They hang in silent clusters looking like deflated, highly translucent balloons, possessing a strange, fascinating, and purely functional beauty. Their colour is a mottled, pale parchment yellow, crisscrossed extensively with the faint, ghostly remnants of microscopic veins. The master unties a small bundle of the bladders and carries them back to his sunlit workbench, because they have been hanging in the incredibly dry, chalky air of the mill. The thin leather has become stiff and slightly brittle, crackling sharply like dry autumn leaves when handled. To restore their natural supple elasticity, they must be coaxed and deeply conditioned. He reaches for a small round tin of purified mutton tallow sitting near the fading warmth of the iron brazier. The tallow is a solid, incredibly creamy white paste, completely devoid of the sharp herbal scents of his washing soap. It smells only of rich, heavy, roasted fat and the quiet, deeply comforting warmth of a farmhouse kitchen. He takes a small dollop of the tallow onto his fingertips and begins to massage it gently into the surface of one of the dry bladders. His thumbs work in slow, deliberate, overlapping circles, pressing the rich fat deep into the microscopic pores of the cured membrane. The sound of this process is an incredibly soft, wet rustling shh, slick, shh, slick. As the tallow is absorbed, the dry, brittle parchment colour completely vanishes, instantly replaced by a deep, beautiful, translucent amber. The bladder becomes incredibly soft, pliable, and perfectly smooth to the touch, feeling almost like warm, living skin once more. He works silently, methodically, completely absorbed in the intimate, sensory preparation of these humble vessels, ensuring they are perfectly ready to cradle the finest blue dust, carrying the artistic soul of the mill out into the vibrant, waiting heart of Florence. As the final pig bladder is massaged to a state of perfect amber suppleness, the master sets it gently upon the maple workbench and lowers himself onto a simple, backless stool of polished chestnut wood. The physical demands of the morning, the heavy grinding, the cold water kneading, the precise accounting have gracefully subsided, leaving a profound, expansive stillness that completely fills the vast vaulted room. He reaches across the table and picks up a single, uncrushed fragment of raw lapis lazuli, a stray piece that escaped the morning's violent encounter with the heavy basalt basin. He holds it loosely in the deeply lined palm of his right hand, resting his forearm on his heavy woolen knee, and simply watches the way the mid-morning sunlight interacts with the ancient mineral. The stone is roughly the size of a large walnut, jagged and entirely unpolished. A heavy, dense fragment of the high Afghan mountains brought low into the gentle, misty river valley of Tuscany. In the bright, unbroken shaft of the sunbeam, the microscopic dust motes perform their endless slow-motion ballet, drifting down like golden snow around his still hand. He does not look at the stone as a merchant evaluating its yield in gold florins. Instead, he looks at it with the quiet, reverent gaze of a philosopher, recognizing it as a physical vessel of unimaginable, deeply compressed history. To hold this heavy, deeply blue rock is to hold a silent, tangible piece of eternity. Long before the very first foundation stones of Florence were ever laid upon the marshy banks of the Arno, and long before humanity even possessed the language to describe the colour of the sky, this stone was resting in the absolute crushing darkness of the Earth's crust. Deep within the towering peaks of the Hindu Kush, immense tectonic forces so incredibly powerful and agonizingly slow that they entirely defy human comprehension, pressed and folded the deep ocean beds of a forgotten ancient world. The master traces the rough, uneven surface of the rock with his thick thumb, feeling the sharp ridges of the white calcite veins and the tiny, coarse bumps of the golden pyrite crystals. He feels the profound, biting cold density of the silicate, a temperature born of complete eternal isolation from the gentle warmth of the sun. For millions of years this blue marvel existed in a state of perfect, undisturbed slumber. It did not know the changing of the seasons or the soft falling of the winter snow. It knew only the immense, silent, suffocating weight of the mountains pressing down upon it, slowly giving birth to its breathtaking celestial colour. It is an artifact of a world entirely without light and sound, yet it holds the absolute essence of the most brilliant daytime sky securely within its hidden, rocky heart. In the quiet, dusty sanctuary of the Florentine Mill, these two vastly different scales of time, the fragile, fleeting span of a single human life and the deep, unfathomable eons of the earth, quietly and peacefully intersect. The master shifts his gaze to the thick pigskin-bound ledger resting securely on his slanted walnut desk. The ledger is a beautiful, necessary mechanism for capturing human time. It breaks the fast-flowing river of daily existence down into highly manageable, structured droplets of days, months, and years. It faithfully records the exact weight of the morning crush and the specific date of the cold water wash, smelling faintly of dried cotton rag and astringent iron ink. But the heavy stone resting in his hand completely ignores the leather ledger. It laughs silently at the very concept of a Tuesday morning in the year 1540. To the small piece of lapis lazuli, the entire dramatic rise and fall of the Renaissance, the soaring construction of the great Florentine domes and the painstaking, dedicated labour of the master miller himself are absolutely nothing more than a single microscopic blink of an eye. The master finds a deep, profound comfort in this realization. The unyielding reality of the ancient stone beautifully removes the heavy burden of his own mortality. He is merely a brief passing caretaker of the blue, gently facilitating the stone's incredible transition from the dark depths of the earth into the sweeping light of human artistry. He shifts the stone gently in his palm, feeling its satisfying, completely grounding weight against his warmed skin. He closes his eyes and imagines the incredibly long, highly perilous journey this specific fragment has undertaken to reach this sunlit alcove in Italy. It was violently pried from the cold wall of a high mountain cave by hands he will never know, hands scarred by the freezing, howling winds of the east. It was loaded into heavy woven baskets and carried down treacherous, narrow cliff paths on the backs of sure-footed mules, the heavy leather saddlebags swaying rhythmically with every cautious step. It joined the vast, heavily guarded caravans of the ancient Silk Road, crossing endless oceans of burning desert sand and navigating high mountain passes swept by cruel, blinding snowstorms. It was traded in the noisy, deeply fragrant bazaars of Damascus, exchanging hands over complex, hushed negotiations steeped in the aroma of cardamom and mint. It finally boarded a heavy merchant galleon, rocking in the dark, damp belly of the ship, as it slowly crossed the unpredictable expanse of the Mediterranean Sea, accompanied by the creaking of massive timbers and the sharp scent of sea salt and hot pine pitch, before eventually resting on the chaotic docks of Venice and travelling gently down the calm waters of the Arno to his quiet mill. So much endless, exhausting effort and passing time, all entirely dedicated to the movement of a single rock. And yet this immense journey across continents and centuries is merely a quiet prelude to the stone's final, everlasting destiny. The master opens his eyes and looks closely at the vibrant, deeply saturated indigo matrix hiding just beneath the dull, grey calcite dust on the surface of the rock. He knows that very soon, this solid fragment will be completely pulverized, washed in the freezing spring water, and entirely transformed into a weightless, ethereal powder. It will be carefully bound with the thick golden linseed oils of the earth and swept across a stretched canvas or a broad expanse of wet, freshly laid plaster by the steady hand of a true artistic genius. Once painted onto the damp plaster of a fresco, it will undergo a final chemical lock, becoming an absolute, integral and permanent part of the wall itself. It will achieve a completely new, untouchable form of immortality. The master knows with a quiet, absolute certainty that his own breath will eventually fade, his calloused hands will still, and the heavy oak waterwheel of his beloved mill will eventually rot, splinter, and return to the soft earth. But the brilliant blue he painstakingly liberates will beautifully, endlessly endure. It will gaze down from the soaring, vaulted ceilings of grand cathedrals and radiate out from the wooden panels of quiet chapels for thousands of years. It will offer a stunning glimpse of the eternal heavens to countless generations of weary souls, long after the year 1540 has completely faded into the soft mists of memory. He gently closes his fingers around the jagged rock, holding it close to the radiating warmth of his palm, finding an unshakable, profound peace in the silent, enduring legacy of the blue dust. The master miller gently releases his grip on the raw, uncrushed fragment of lapis lazuli, allowing it to slip from his warmed palm and come to rest upon the scarred, deeply textured surface of the maple workbench. The heavy stone meets the wood with a soft, hollow thud, returning to a state of quiet, inanimate observation. He leaves it resting perfectly within the center of a warm, golden pool of mid-morning sunlight that has slowly crawled across the table. The intense physical labor of the extraction is far behind him, and the administrative duties of the pigskin ledger are complete. Now in this deeply peaceful suspended hour before the noon bell rings, he indulges in a deeply personal, entirely silent ritual of validation. He wishes to witness the true, undeniable soul of his labor, to see the color awaken just as the grand masters of the city will eventually see it. To do this, he reaches toward a small, meticulously organized wooden shelf positioned just above his workstation and retrieves a beautifully crafted slab of pure Venetian glass. This glass palette is a marvel of Renaissance artisanship, roughly the size of a large book, and incredibly thick. The surface is perfectly, astonishingly flat, polished to a degree that it feels exactly like a sheet of smooth, undisturbed ice. Where the edges of the glass have been carefully beveled, the clear material captures the ambient light and refracts it, glowing with a soft, watery, pale green luminescence that resembles the shallows of a quiet lagoon. He places the heavy glass slab flat onto the wooden table. To truly understand the potential of the Fra Angelico grade currently resting beneath the freezing water in the settling room, he must test a tiny sample of a previously finished batch. From a deeply shadowed corner of the shelf, he withdraws a remarkably small, slender vial of hand-blown glass, no larger than his own thumb. This delicate vessel is sealed not with heavy crimson wax, but with a simple, perfectly fitted stopper of soft, porous cork. He pinches the cork between his thumb and forefinger and twists gently. It yields with a tiny, incredibly satisfying dry squeak. He holds the open vial over the absolute center of the flawless glass palette and taps the side of the fragile glass with his fingernail. Tink, tink, tink. The sound is high, pure, and crystalline. From the narrow neck of the vial, a minuscule amount of the ultimate purified ultramarine dust falls, Because the powder is so impossibly fine, it does not drop like sand. It descends like a heavy, localized mist, a tiny, silent avalanche of pure, velvety midnight blue. It settles onto the transparent surface of the glass in a small, perfectly conical mound, entirely matte and completely devoid of any reflective shine. It looks like a tiny, captured fragment of a starless night sky resting upon a sheet of frozen water. To awaken this sleeping dust, it must be introduced to the lifeblood of the painter's craft, the oil of the flaxseed. He sets the empty vial aside and reaches for a small, round-bellied cruet of clear glass. Inside this vessel rests the purified linseed oil. This is not the heavy green, peppery olive oil of his morning bread. This is an incredibly refined, aged medium, pressed from the small brown seeds of the blue-flowered flax plant. The oil has been washed, filtered through fine sand, and left to bleach in the hot Tuscan sun for many long months until it has achieved a state of absolute breathtaking clarity. It is a pale, liquid gold possessing the exact warm hue of late afternoon honey. The master removes the glass stopper, which features a long, slender glass rod extending down into the oil. As he lifts the rod, a single heavy drop of the golden liquid clings desperately to the very tip. He holds the rod suspended directly over the tiny blue mountain. The drop of oil swells slowly, gathering weight and stretching downward, capturing a miniature upside-down reflection of the entire sunlit room within its glowing spherical belly. Finally, gravity softly overcomes the surface tension. The drop detaches and falls in perfect silence, landing directly upon the apex of the ultramarine dust. The immediate chemical embrace between the liquid and the powder is a microscopic masterpiece of visual poetry. The dry, thirsty dust instantly drinks the golden oil. You can watch the color transform in a fraction of a second, the pale matte finish darkening profoundly as the liquid surrounds and entirely encapsulates every single invisible particle of the crushed stone. The subtle, dusty scent of the dry pigment is immediately replaced by the rich, deeply comforting aroma of the linseed oil. It is a heavy, beautifully nutty fragrance, smelling of sun-baked fields, late summer harvests, and the quiet, enduring patience of the drying lofts. To complete the marriage of these two elemental materials, the master introduces the muller. This tool is a solid, heavy piece of perfectly clear glass, shaped very much like a smooth, flattened teardrop, featuring a broad, flat base and a slender, rounded neck that fits perfectly into the hollow of his palm. He grasps the glass muller and places its flat base directly over the oil-soaked mound of blue dust. He begins to grind. He moves his hand in slow, incredibly smooth, overlapping figure-eight patterns across the surface of the glass palette. The sound that rises from this simple action is perhaps the most deeply hypnotic, soothing noise in the entire mill. It is a soft, wet, highly frictional whisper. Sh. It sounds like the gentle, rhythmic brushing of heavy silk skirts against a marble floor, or the slow, rhythmic breathing of a deeply sleeping child. As the heavy glass muller glides over the flat glass slab, it crushes the oil and the dust together, forcing the golden liquid deep into the microscopic voids between the particles of lazurite. The physical sensation beneath his hand is one of thick, luxurious resistance. The paint feels incredibly smooth yet delightfully heavy, offering a soft, buttery drag against the glass. With every slow, looping pass of the muller, the blue becomes richer, deeper, and profoundly more luminous. The matte, dusty quality of the raw powder is entirely banished. The mixture transforms into a brilliant, highly glossy, completely uniform pool of liquid sapphire. It is a blue so incredibly intense, so absolutely pure, that it seems to defy the very limitations of the physical world. The master stops his grinding, leaving the glass muller resting near the edge of the glass slab. He steps back and looks down at the small pool of finished, perfectly mulled paint. Because it is now suspended in the clear, glossy matrix of the oil, the ultramarine no longer merely absorbs the light, it interacts with it. The surface of the wet paint has become a perfect, dark mirror. If you lean in closely, you can clearly see the reflection of the tall, narrow eastern window perfectly captured within the tiny pool of blue. You can see the pale grey sky, the faint, distant silhouette of the rolling Tuscan hills, and the bright, singular beam of the morning sun, all trapped flawlessly within the liquid stone. This simple reflection sparks a profound philosophical realization within the quiet mind of the master miller. He realizes that he is not merely manufacturing a color, he is actively capturing the transient, fleeting light of this specific Florentine morning and granting it an eternal physical form. The sunlight that traveled across millions of miles of empty space to finally strike the surface of his workbench is now permanently entangled with the ancient dark earth of the Afghan mountains. When this paint is eventually transferred to a canvas or a vaulted ceiling, it will carry this trapped light with it. Long after the sun has set on this Tuesday in the year 1540, long after the river Arno has altered its course, and long after his own name has completely vanished from the memory of the city, this exact magnificent light will continue to shine. It will radiate from the heavy folded robes of a painted saint, offering a glimpse of the divine to generations of weary travellers seeking solace in the quiet chill of a grand cathedral. The master stares deeply into the small glossy pool of ultramarine, losing himself entirely in its infinite reflective depths. He breathes in the warm, nutty scent of the linseed oil and listens to the profound expanding silence of the room. He has successfully bridged the immense gap between the crushing darkness of the earth and the boundless brilliant light of the heavens, and in this quiet, solitary moment of absolute perfection, his soul is completely, wonderfully at peace. The tiny, perfect pool of liquid sapphire resting upon the glass palette has served its silent philosophical purpose. It has proven the immaculate quality of the pigment, but it cannot remain there, exposed to the open air of the mill, where stray, wandering dust motes might compromise its absolute purity. The master must carefully erase this beautiful test, returning the thick slab of Venetian glass to its state of flawless, transparent neutrality. From a small, meticulously organized wooden drawer at the corner of his workbench, he retrieves a folded square of ancient, incredibly soft cotton. This fabric has been washed hundreds of times, stripped of all its original stiffness until it possesses the delicate, yielding texture of a faded cloud. He uncorks a small, stout bottle of distilled spike lavender oil, a precious, highly volatile solvent imported from the sun-drenched fields of southern France. The moment the cork is removed, the air is pierced by an incredibly sharp, herbaceous, and deeply clarifying fragrance. It is a clean, piercing aroma that instantly clears the mind, cutting effortlessly through the heavy, nutty scent of the linseed oil and the lingering, dusty chalkiness of the stone. He presses the folded cotton against the open mouth of the bottle, tipping it just enough to dampen the center of the cloth with a single dark circle of the fragrant liquid. Returning to the glass palette, he places the damp cotton over the vibrant pool of ultramarine paint. He presses down with his fingertips using a slow, sweeping, highly deliberate circular motion. The sound is entirely different from the heavy, frictional grinding of the glass muller. It is a soft, wet, entirely muted squeak. Squee-swish, squee-swish. The spike lavender oil immediately acts upon the heavy linseed medium, thinning it out, dissolving the sticky binder with effortless chemical grace. The deep, dark mirror of the blue is instantly swept away, spreading briefly across the glass into a pale, translucent, ghostly wash, before being completely absorbed into the thirsty fibers of the ancient cotton cloth. The thick slab of Venetian glass is left completely clean, cold, and transparent once more, returning to its quiet slumber, while the master's hands smell faintly, beautifully of the distant purple-blooming hills of Provence. With his workstation restored to perfect order, the master turns his gaze away from his tools and steps slowly toward the thick, recessed alcove of the eastern window. This window is not merely a hole in the wall, it is a deep architectural tunnel carved through nearly 3 feet of solid, unyielding pietraforte. The sides of this tunnel are plastered and whitewashed, creating a smooth, incredibly cool, bright funnel that captures the morning light and draws it gently into the dim interior of the mill. He leans his forearms against the broad, slanting stone sill, feeling the rough, pitted texture of the limestone beneath the sleeves of his heavy woolen cloak. The sill is pleasantly cold, carrying the deep thermal mass of the building, a steady anchoring temperature that remains entirely untouched by the fleeting warmth of the rising sun. He looks closely at the glass itself. It is not the perfectly flat, invisible glass of the modern age, but an intricate handcrafted mosaic of small diamond-shaped panes, held firmly together by a heavy dark lattice of soft lead came. The glass spun by the master glaziers of the city is wonderfully imperfect. It possesses a faint, mesmerizing seafoam green tint, born of the natural iron impurities in the sand from which it was melted. If you bring your face close to the pane, you can see the concentric, circular ripples radiating outward from the center of each diamond, the exact frozen memory of the rotational force used to spin the molten glass into a flat disc. Trapped within these pale green ripples are tiny elongated seed bubbles, microscopic pockets of 16th century air caught forever in the cooling sand. When the morning sunlight passes through these imperfections, it does not enter the room evenly. It bends, fractures, and cascades into a stunning, complex array of soft, watery shadows and brilliant, concentrated highlights that dance slowly across the slate floor. Through this warped, beautifully distorted lens, the master looks out over the wide, gently curving expanse of the river Arno. The dense, charcoal-grey mists of the early dawn have finally, entirely burned away, surrendering to the crisp, clear, deeply illuminated air of the mid-morning. The surface of the river is a mesmerizing, ever-changing canvas of movement and light. It flows with a heavy, languid power, carrying the silt and the memories of the high Apennine mountains down toward the distant, waiting sea. The color of the water is a complex, muddy olive green, heavily streaked with long, shivering ribbons of blinding liquid silver where the sun directly strikes the gentle, rolling ripples. He watches a small, stray piece of driftwood, a stripped, pale branch of willow, bobbing slowly along the current, twisting and turning in the invisible eddies, completely surrendering to the relentless forward pull of the water. The river presents a profound, deeply moving philosophical contrast to the work he performs within the quiet walls of the mill. The Arno is the ultimate embodiment of fleeting, ungraspable time. It is a state of perpetual chaotic flow. You can never look at the exact same river twice. The water that passes beneath his window at this very second will eventually be lost to the vast, salty embrace of the Mediterranean, entirely unrecoverable and forever gone. It washes away the past with absolute indifferent efficiency. Yet the lapis lazuli he meticulously crushes and purifies is the exact, complete opposite. It is the ultimate embodiment of stillness, of arrested time, and of profound, unyielding permanence. He is spending his mortal, fleeting hours coaxing eternity out of a rock, creating a color that will aggressively resist the corrosive, washing flow of time that the river so beautifully represents. As he watches the water, the master reflects upon his own deeply hidden, entirely anonymous legacy. In the bustling, fiercely competitive bottegas of Florence, the grand master painters, the Raphaels, the Michelangelos, the Pontormos, will eventually brush this celestial blue onto their magnificent canvases and sign their recognizable, celebrated names with a flourish of dark ink. They will be remembered, their lives documented in heavy leather-bound books, their geniuses praised by wealthy patrons and future generations. But the master miller of the blue dust will never sign a painting. His name will never be whispered in the hushed, awestruck corridors of the grand galleries. He is entirely invisible to history, a quiet, unseen ghost, laboring in the damp shadows of the riverbank. Yet, leaning against the cold stone sill, listening to the soft, distant, rhythmic rushing of the water, he feels absolutely no sorrow or resentment in this profound anonymity. In fact, he finds an immense, deeply liberating peace within it. He does not need the loud, fleeting applause of the city. He understands with a quiet, unshakable certainty that his soul is intimately, permanently woven into the very fabric of the art itself. The brilliant, breathtaking ultramarine skies that will soar above the painted heads of angels and saints are his true, silent signature. Every time a weary traveller looks up at a glowing fresco and feels a sudden, inexplicable rush of divine peace, they are unknowingly feeling the careful, patient rhythm of his own heartbeat. They are witnessing the long, freezing hours he spent with his hands submerged in the icy spring water. They are smelling the faint ghost of the sweet beeswax and the sharp pine resin. His legacy is not a name carved into a marble bust or penned in a dusty archive. His legacy is the purity of the color itself. It is a pure, unadulterated emotion trapped in stone and released by his calloused, blue-stained hands. He takes a long, slow, deep breath, pulling the cool, sun-warmed air of the window tunnel deep into his lungs. He smells the fresh, watery tang of the river, the faint green scent of the moss growing on the distant waterwheel, and the dry, ancient dust resting upon the stone sill. The world outside is moving, flowing, racing toward the future, but here, in the quiet, suspended amber of the mill, time remains beautifully, safely arrested. He is a master of the unseen, a silent guardian of the eternal sky, and as he turns his back to the river and steps back into the comforting, heavy shadows of the workshop, he is completely, wonderfully content to simply remain a necessary hidden pillar in the magnificent, towering cathedral of history. As the morning steadily deepens, gracefully approaching the silent, suspended apex of noon, the master miller turns his steps away from the heavy slate floor and the quiet machinery of the ground level. He moves with a slow, deliberate cadence toward a secondary, narrower wooden staircase situated at the back of the building. This staircase climbs to the absolute highest point of the mill, the grand drying chamber tucked directly beneath the expansive sloping terracotta roof. The steps here are not made of stone, but of thick, rough-hewn planks of ancient chestnut, secured entirely by wooden pegs. With each upward step, the wood groans softly under his weight, a low, deeply resonant, musical creak that speaks of the timber's immense age and its long, patient accommodation of human presence. The handrail is a simple length of polished ash, worn to a glassy perfection by the countless grips of the generations who have climbed this exact path before him. As he climbs higher, the atmosphere undergoes a profound, settling transformation. The heavy dampness of the settling vats and the sharp scent of the spiked lavender oil completely fall away. The air in this upper chamber is incredibly dry. It is a warm, enveloping dryness that feels like a thick blanket settling gently over the shoulders. The heat radiating from the sun-baked terracotta tiles above presses down into the space, creating a stable microclimate essential for the final stage of the lapis lazuli's long journey. The scent here is singularly pure and austere. It smells entirely of sun-warmed dust, ancient, desiccated timber, and the faint underlying chalky aroma of dry earth. It is the smell of absolute stillness, a fragrance that naturally commands the lungs to draw deeper, slower breaths, inviting a state of profound, meditative calm. Stepping off the final stair, the master enters a vast, cathedral-like space of shadows and soft, diffused light. The architecture of the roof is fully exposed, a breathtaking geometry of massive, interlocking oak trusses and crossbeams spanning the width of the building. Spiders have been allowed to weave their intricate, silvery masterpieces in the highest corners, their delicate webs catching the faint, ambient light and turning it into suspended, shimmering constellations of spun glass. The floor is made of wide, perfectly fitted planks of pale pine, dusted with a microscopic permanent layer of fine blue powder that softens every footfall into a muted, velvety whisper. Dominating the entirety of this vast loft is a magnificent, silent forest of wooden drying racks. These racks are constructed from thin slats of pale linden wood, arranged in long, perfectly parallel rows. Draped meticulously over these wooden frames are hundreds of lengths of pure, unbleached linen. This is the resting place for the Fra Angelico pigment, after it has been carefully scooped from the cold water of the settling vats. The linen acts as a gentle, breathable sieve, drawing the remaining moisture out of the heavy blue sludge, allowing the air to slowly, patiently claim the water, leaving only the pure, celestial dust behind. The master walks slowly down the narrow aisle between two rows of the hanging fabric. The linen panels hang perfectly still, forming soft, vertical walls of pale, oatmeal-coloured cloth. As he passes, the heavy, woolen fabric of his cloak brushes very faintly against the linen, producing a soft, dry, incredibly soothing rustle. Shh! That sounds like the gentle exhalation of the building itself. He stops before a panel of cloth that holds a batch of pigment drawn from the vats over a week ago. The visual transformation of the drying pigment is a microscopic marvel of nature. The lapis lazuli, which entered the linen as a thick, wet paste, has slowly contracted and fractured as the moisture evaporated. It now forms a brilliant, deeply textured ultramarine crust upon the fabric. The master leans in close, his face only inches from the drying powder. The surface of the pigment is a stunning, intricate landscape of tiny, interconnected cracks and fissures, looking exactly like a miniature aerial view of a deeply parched, sun-baked desert, but rendered entirely in the most intense, breathtaking shade of blue imaginable. The edges of these tiny fissures curl upward ever so slightly, catching the soft, diffused light filtering through the roof tiles and casting microscopic violet shadows across the deep valleys of the pigment. He reaches out with his right hand, extending his index finger to gently touch the surface of the dry crust. He does not press down, he merely grazes the very highest peaks of the cracked blue landscape. The tactile sensation is profoundly satisfying. It is incredibly dry, entirely devoid of any residual moisture, offering a delicate, fragile resistance before crumbling softly beneath his skin, with a faint, almost inaudible crackle. The powder that transfers to his fingertip is so fine that it feels completely weightless, a ghost of a physical substance. It is softer than the finest silk, softer than the petals of a bruised rose, a pure elemental dust that completely coats the intricate ridges of his fingerprint in a vibrant, glowing layer of midnight blue. Standing in this silent, warm, linen-draped sanctuary, rubbing the weightless blue dust between his thumb and forefinger, the master engages in a deep, quiet communion with the fundamental philosophy of his craft. He is surrounded by the physical manifestation of time's passage. The drying of the pigment cannot be rushed by any human intervention. No application of fire or clever mechanical device can safely accelerate this final evaporation. The lapis lazuli demands absolute patience. It requires the master to step back, to completely surrender his control, and to allow the gentle, invisible forces of the ambient air to do their slow, meticulous work. It is a profound lesson in humility, a daily reminder that humanity is not the master of the earth, but merely a quiet participant in its grand, unfolding rhythms. He looks at the rows upon rows of drying blue, recognizing that each hanging panel represents days of grueling, freezing labor. Yet in this loft, all the violence of the crushing wheels, all the frantic energy of the rushing river, and all the biting cold of the spring water have been entirely transmuted into absolute, unshakable peace. The brutal friction of the world below has been completely distilled into this silent, fragile dust. It is a perfect metaphor for the human experience, the intense struggles and heavy burdens of life eventually softening, purifying, and leaving behind only a quiet, enduring essence. The master wipes his blue-stained thumb against the coarse fabric of his woolen cloak, adding another faint indigo ghost to the deeply worn garment. He turns his gaze upward, looking past the heavy oak trusses toward the underside of the terracotta roof. He knows that beyond those clay tiles, the vast dome of the actual sky stretches out in all directions. He has spent his entire life looking down into dark basins, staring into cold water and focusing his eyes on the heavy, unyielding rock. Yet, in doing so, he has managed to entirely capture the boundless, untouchable heavens. The sky is no longer just an abstract canopy hanging above the world. It is right here, resting quietly on the unbleached linen, waiting patiently in the warm, dry shadows. As he slowly begins to walk back toward the wooden staircase, the silence of the drying loft seems to deepen, wrapping around him like a heavy, protective embrace. The soft shh of his cloak brushing the linens follows him, a gentle lullaby sung by the fabric of his labor. The philosophy of the stone is complete. The heavy earth has been fully redeemed, transformed into pure, radiant light. The master miller descends the wooden stairs, his mind as perfectly still and quiet as the blue dust resting in the rafters, deeply comforted by the knowledge that he has successfully navigated the beautiful ancient space between the mortal world and the eternal sleeping stars. As the unseen sun begins its slow, inevitable descent behind the cypress-crowned hills of the distant Tuscan countryside, the quality of light within the grand, vaulted space of the Lapis Lazuli Mill undergoes a profound, deeply soothing transformation. The sharp golden clarity of the mid-morning has entirely dissolved, completely yielding to a thick honeyed amber that moves across the vast irregular slate floor with the creeping, imperceptible slowness of a deeply ancient glacier. This late afternoon light does not illuminate the room so much as it softens every single sharp edge, blurring the boundaries between the heavy oak pillars and the encroaching shadows. It catches the billions of microscopic airborne particles of stone dust that still linger from the morning's crush, turning them into a suspended, slow-moving river of glowing, warm copper. You can stand perfectly still in the center of the room and simply watch this suspended, glowing dust drift aimlessly in the completely breathless air, a tiny, hypnotic galaxy of floating gold that demands absolutely nothing from your mind but passive, relaxed observation. You can watch the leading edge of a shadow cast by the massive, silent waterwheel gear stretch itself out slowly across the floor. It moves a fraction of an inch at a time, creeping gracefully over the shallow dips and the naturally worn edges of the grey stone, blanketing the ground in a deep, heavy velvet dusk. The heat of the day, which had earlier pressed down from the high terracotta roof tiles, now begins to slowly, gently exhale. The ambient temperature of the workshop cools degree by invisible degree, leaving the air feeling incredibly heavy, thick and perfectly wonderfully tempered. It is an atmosphere that actively, continuously encourages your heavy eyelids to droop. It feels exactly like a thick, weighted, atmospheric blanket wrapping intimately around your dropping shoulders, completely numbing the busy, waking mind to any of the frantic, lingering concerns of the modern world outside. The relentless, rhythmic ticking of human time has completely surrendered to the deep, slow, eternal breathing of the massive stone architecture. The master miller, moving now with the slow, languid heaviness of a man who has fully and completely spent his physical strength, approaches the deep-set windows facing the river. His movements are no longer the precise, purposeful, and highly controlled actions of the morning. They are wonderfully loose, unhurried, and deeply relaxed. The heavy leather boots upon his feet seem to weigh twice as much, scuffing softly against the slate with a dry, rhythmic scrape that sounds exactly like a deep, exhausted sigh. He reaches out for the heavy, hand-forged iron latch of the solid walnut shutters. The iron is beautifully cool against his blue-stained fingertips, providing a quiet, grounding contrast to the lingering, ambient warmth of the surrounding air. He grasps the metal firmly and pulls the thick, heavy wooden panels inward. As the massive walnut moves on its ancient iron hinges, it makes a soft, prolonged, deeply resonant groaning sound, a low wooden hum that reverberates gently against the thick masonry of the walls. The sound is incredibly thick and comforting, reminiscent of the slow, creaking shift of a great wooden galleon settling deeply into the calm waters of a perfectly safe harbour at midnight. As the two heavy panels draw closer together, the brilliant, fading rectangle of the outside world is slowly, gracefully narrowed to a single burning vertical slit of bruised plum and pale orange light. And then, with a final, muted, deeply satisfying clunk of the heavy wooden crossbar falling perfectly into its iron bracket, the daylight is entirely severed. The workshop is plunged into an immediate, profound and profoundly safe darkness. It is not an empty, hollow blackness, but a rich, highly textured twilight, smelling intensely of old, dry timber, cold chalk, and the sweet, fading floral memory of the beeswax pastiglia. The sudden exclusion of the visual world allows all of the other senses to soften, blur, and drift, turning the entire cavernous room into a perfect, quiet cocoon of absolute, undisturbed rest. He walks blindly, yet with the absolute, unthinking, flawless familiarity of decades of repetition, back toward the scarred maple workbench. The only illumination remaining in the entire cavernous space is the tiny, solitary, flickering tongue of the olive oil lamp he lit hours ago, and the very faint, dull, cherry-red glow of the completely exhausted embers buried deeply within the soft grey ashes of the small wall hearth. He stops before the simple terracotta oil lamp. The golden flame dances lazily, almost weakly on the thick braided cotton wick, casting huge, soft, wonderfully wavering silhouettes of his own body across the high arched stone ceiling. He wets his thumb and forefinger with his own saliva, pressing the pads of his fingers together for a brief, silent second, Then, with a swift, highly practiced, completely fearless motion, he pinches the burning wick between his fingers. The tiny flame dies instantly with a microscopic, sharp, wet hiss. Immediately, a thin, curling, ghostly ribbon of pale blue smoke rises from the blackened cotton tip. It is completely invisible in the heavy gloom, but it announces its presence through a remarkably heavy, deeply nostalgic, and intensely comforting fragrance. It is the distinct smell of toasted olive oil, charred cotton fiber, and the absolute definitive end of the day's labor. It is a profound atmospheric scent that signals directly to the deepest, most primitive parts of the brain that the time for vigilance has entirely passed, that the heavy wooden doors are locked, that the thick stone walls are completely secure, and that nothing more can or should be done until the sun returns again tomorrow. He stands entirely motionless in the dark, allowing this thick, smoky scent to wash over his face, feeling the deep, wonderful, incredibly pleasant ache of exhaustion settling securely into the heavy muscles of his back and the thick, sturdy joints of his knees. With the visual world completely extinguished and the various smells of the day slowly settling back down into the cool earth, the quiet, auditory landscape of the mill takes complete and total precedence. Without the violent, tectonic grinding of the basalt stones or the heavy, echoing footsteps of the master to interrupt it, the ancient, ongoing song of the river Arno swells gently to fill the quiet void. Because the heavy wooden sluice gate outside remains securely closed, the water does not crash against the mossy wheel, it merely bypasses the mill entirely in a smooth, continuous, heavy, rushing glide. It sounds exactly like the prolonged, incredibly gentle exhalation of a sleeping giant. It is the ultimate, timeless lullaby of the earth, an endless, beautifully repeating cycle of heavy water sliding effortlessly over smooth, ancient stones and dragging gently against the soft, yielding mud of the riverbanks. As you listen, standing silently in the velvet darkness of this historical sanctuary, you find yourself completely unable to resist the rhythm. You naturally begin to match the cadence of your own breathing to the slow, heavy oceanic surge of the river outside. You inhale slowly, deeply, as the imagined water swells heavily against the stone masonry of the foundation. You exhale fully, completely, as the water falls away, carrying all tension down the valley. Your limbs, whether you are simply observing this space in your mind or lying quietly in the absolute safety of your own bed, begin to feel impossibly wonderfully heavy. It is a weight that pulls you downward, a gentle gravity that sinks your heels, your shoulders, and the back of your head deep down into whatever soft surface supports them. The heavy iron gears of the mill have stopped. The precious blue dust in the locked subterranean vault sleeps securely in its glass vials. The massive cold granite stones sleep in their dark basins. The master miller, finding his way to his wooden stool in the perfect dark, slowly lowers his heavy grey head and completely surrenders to sleep. The rich, vibrant history of the 16th century quietly folds its heavy, soft, velvet wings tightly around you, completely blocking out the noise of the present, holding you perfectly still, entirely safe, and profoundly, deeply, and endlessly at peace. The darkness inside the Lapis Lazuli Mill is not a hollow void, but a rich, deeply physical presence. It possesses a comforting weight, a velvet texture, and a perfectly tempered coolness that gently embraces every square inch of the silent space. As you rest securely within this ancient sanctuary, the sharp, defining boundaries of the physical world begin to entirely, beautifully dissolve. The massive, unyielding stone walls, the towering, heavy oak pillars, the vast sloping terracotta roof, and the quiet sleeping machinery, they all slowly melt away into the gloom, leaving only the pure, concentrated, deeply comforting essence of absolute safety. The still air rests against your skin like a layer of the finest, softest, most breathable silk, barely perceptible, yet profoundly reassuring in its gentle, static pressure. There is absolutely no need to look, no need to strain your eyes to see, for this darkness is a meticulously woven blanket, crafted from the quietest threads of the 16th century night. It completely shields your tired, overworked mind from the frantic, chaotic demands of the waking hours. It is a highly protective, deeply enveloping shade, not a harsh black, but the exact, soothing color of the deepest, most tranquil midnight sky, a heavy cosmic indigo that holds you in a perfect, entirely suspended state of quiet, unshakable grace. You are completely untethered from the burdens of the day, floating effortlessly in this calm, historical ocean of shadows. The rhythm of the sleeping world around you is incredibly slow, entirely devoid of urgency, and deeply, wonderfully contagious. Your own breathing, without any conscious effort, naturally begins to mimic the heavy, languid oceanic pulse of the river Arno flowing just outside the thick stone walls. With every slow, expansive inhale, you draw in the profound, cooling peace of the damp, mineral-rich earth, feeling your chest rise with the gentle, effortless buoyancy of a wooden boat lifting on a calm, moonlit tide. With every long, completely unhurried exhale, you release the lingering tension of the day, letting it flow out of your body and drift away, carried downstream by the endless rushing water, entirely forgotten and forever gone. Inhale, peace. Exhale, release. The sound of your own breath becomes entirely indistinguishable from the soft, muffled, rhythmic rushing of the river. Hoo-oosh, hoo-oosh. It is a continuous, deeply hypnotic cycle, a natural metronome that continuously slows the frantic beating of your heart, coaxing it down into a steady, heavy, profoundly resting rhythm. You are no longer just observing the quiet of the mill. You have become a completely integral, seamless part of its silent, breathing architecture. The air you breathe is the same air that holds the sleeping blue dust. The peace you feel is the same peace that settles over the ancient, unmoving stones. As the rhythmic, watery lullaby of the Arno washes continuously over your senses, a deeply satisfying, incredibly pleasant heaviness begins to bloom at the very tips of your toes. It is the warm, gentle, completely undeniable pull of gravity inviting your physical body to finally fully surrender. This heaviness is not a burden. It is a profound, luxurious release. You feel it spreading slowly, warmly up through the arches of your feet, completely relaxing the tight, tired muscles of your calves and sinking deeply into the heavy joints of your knees. Your legs become pleasantly, wonderfully leaden, pressing down firmly, securely into the soft, supporting surface beneath you. The comforting, warm gravity continues its slow upward journey, releasing the complex tension held within your hips, sinking deeply into your lower back, and completely untying the tight, invisible knots within your stomach. Your spine, which has held you upright and alert throughout the long demands of the day, now entirely relaxes, melting softly down, vertebra by vertebra, completely supported by the earth. This heavy, warm sensation pours into your shoulders, causing them to drop significantly, finally letting go of the invisible weights they have been carrying. It flows down the length of your arms, right through your elbows and wrists, completely relaxing every single finger, until your hands rest utterly limp and still, feeling exactly as heavy and unmoving as the quiet, sleeping granite stones in the dark basins below. In this state of total, heavy, physical surrender, the faintest, most delicate ghosts of the mill's deeply historical fragrances drift lazily through the dark, acting as incredibly soothing, aromatic lullabies for the drifting mind. The sharp, medicinal bite of the distilled spike lavender oil has entirely faded away, leaving behind only the sweetest, softest, most highly diluted memory of purple, sun-drenched floral fields. The heavy, warm, nutty aroma of the golden linseed oil has softened into a gentle, deeply comforting scent, reminiscent of old bound books and quiet, undisturbed libraries where time entirely stands still. The sharp, smoky tang of the extinguished olive oil lamp is nothing more than a faint, nostalgic whisper, a completely harmless, cozy reminder of a fire that has been safely, fully put to rest. Even the deeply mineral, chalky scent of the lapis lazuli dust has mellowed into a clean, pure, earthly fragrance, smelling exactly like fresh, cool rain falling upon dry, ancient slate. You do not actively smell these things anymore, you merely dream of them. They are olfactory echoes, microscopic fragments of the day's physical reality that are slowly, gently dissolving into the vast, quiet, unblemished purity of the night, leading your mind further and further away from the crisp edges of consciousness and deeper into the soft, completely blurred, watercolor landscapes of your own deepest, most peaceful slumber. Let us visualize in this perfect, safe darkness the final, most silent and most deeply peaceful process of the entire mill. Deep below, in the cool, damp, vaulted washing chamber, the massive white ceramic vats rest in absolute undisturbed silence. Within the freezing crystal-clear spring water of those vats, millions upon millions of microscopic, entirely weightless particles of pure ultramarine dust are currently falling. They do not drop quickly, they drift. They descend with an agonizingly slow, incredibly graceful, deeply hypnotic slowness. Each tiny speck of celestial blue catches the faint invisible currents within the water, swirling gently, spiraling softly, completely surrendering to the slow, gentle, inevitable pull of gravity. Down, down, down they drift, through the dark, liquid cosmos, completely insulated from the rushing river outside and the passage of time above. Imagine your own thoughts, your own lingering worries, mimicking this beautiful, silent descent. Every single thought is a tiny particle of dust, losing its sharp edges, becoming entirely weightless, and drifting slowly down, 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 through the clear, dark, quiet waters of your mind. They fall away from the surface, sinking deeper and deeper, until they finally settle softly, entirely undisturbed, upon the smooth, white, perfect bottom of your subconscious. The water above is left completely clear, completely pure, and absolutely wonderfully still. There is absolutely nothing left for you to do. The heavy oak doors are locked from the inside, the massive iron gears are completely at rest, and the precious blue dust is sleeping safely in the deep, silent dark. The history of the Florentine mill has completely absorbed you, wrapping you in a cocoon of unshakable peace. You are perfectly safe. You are entirely comfortable. The heavy, rhythmic rushing of the river Arno continues to wash away the last fragments of the waking world. Hoo-loosh, hoosh, hoorush. Deeper now, slower now. The deep, heavy indigo darkness holds you close, a completely secure embrace that only allows you to drift away into the vast, quiet expanse of the deepest, most restorative sleep. Let the heavy darkness take you. Let the soft river sing you down. The world will wait, the stones will wait. Surrender entirely to the beautiful, endless blue. Sleep now, sleep deeply. Sleep in the absolute, timeless peace of the ancient, silent dust. Welcome to Sleepy History with Wesley, your personal sanctuary of ancient tales. Here, we blend authentic historical events with gentle AI technology to recreate immersive, soothing journeys through time. This channel is crafted specifically for relaxation and sleep support. TAND is not a substitute for professional medical advice. For your safety, please do not listen while driving or operating machinery. Now, close your eyes and let history carry you into a peaceful sleep.